Imagine silence. Not the kind of silence that descends upon a city late at night, nor the stillness of a snow-covered forest. Imagine the absolute primordial silence that reigns 5,000 kilometers, about 3,100 miles, beneath your feet. There, in the very center of our planet, under unimaginable pressure, and at a temperature hotter than the surface of the sun, floats a giant sphere of solid iron and nickel. This is Earth's inner core. Its diameter is approximately 2,400 kilometers, roughly 1,500 miles, just smaller than the moon. It is suspended in the molten ocean of the outer core, and it spins. It spins freely, almost independently of the rest of the planet, governed only by the delicate dance of gravitational and electromagnetic forces. This rotation is not just a geophysical curiosity. It is the heartbeat of our world, the great engine, the geodynamo, that generates the protective magnetic field, our invisible shield. This shield deflects streams of lethal solar radiation and cosmic rays, holds our atmosphere in place, and ultimately makes life on this planet possible. For billions of years, this heart has beaten with a predictable, reliable rhythm. It would speed up slightly, then slow down, running ahead of or falling behind the rotation of the mantle and crust by fractions of a second per year. These tiny oscillations were part of the planet's grand, slow breath, a geological cycle stretched over decades and centuries. Scientists observed it, plotted graphs, built models. They were sure they understood it. They were sure everything was under control. And then, in early 2023, the heartbeat changed. On January 23rd, 2023, the prestigious scientific journal Nature Geoscience published an article that should have been a routine data update for a small circle of specialists. Its authors, geophysicists Yi Yang and Xiaodong Song of Peking University, had analyzed seismic waves from earthquakes that had passed through the planet's center since the 1960s. Their conclusions, written in dry academic language, were a bombshell. Earth's inner core had almost stopped its differential rotation relative to the mantle. Moreover, the accumulated data indicated it might be preparing to start spinning in the opposite direction. The news instantly spread through the world's media, sparking a wave of alarming headlines. Earth's core has stopped. The planet is reversing its spin. The panic was short-lived. The system worked flawlessly. Almost immediately, reassuring comments followed from leading geological societies and institutes. We were told this wasn't a stop in the conventional sense. It was merely a synchronization of speeds. The core had simply caught up to the mantle and was now spinning along with it. We were told this was just part of a natural, multi-decade cycle that repeats roughly every 60 to 70 years. One full oscillation, nothing to worry about. We wouldn't notice any consequences for life on the surface. Perhaps a barely perceptible change in the length of a day by a few thousandths of a second, or negligible fluctuations in the magnetic field. This was the official version, rational, measured, and incredibly convenient. It turned a potentially terrifying event into a scientific curiosity, a topic for dissertations, but not for concern. The world breathed a sigh of relief and moved on to other news. But for those who know how to look not at the data itself, but at the gaps between the data, the story was just beginning. Because in this flawless, polished version of events, there was one fundamental crack. One detail the system chose to ignore. That detail was timing. The official theory states that the core's slowdown is a smooth, gradual process that began back in 2009. For decades, it spun slightly faster than the planet, then began to decelerate, reaching a point of rest before starting to lag behind. This is all described by elegant sine waves, by models of gravitational and magnetic coupling between the core and the mantle. It sounds logical. But when you get access to the raw seismic data, to the unprocessed streams from global seismograph networks, you see something else. Yes, a general slowdown was indeed observed. But in late 2022, something unprecedented occurred. A sharp, almost instantaneous braking impulse, geologically speaking. This was not the smooth swing of a pendulum reaching its apex. This was like someone yanking an emergency brake. This impulse, this seismic shock, was so strange that it was dismissed as instrumental noise, as data processing artifacts, as local anomalies. It was simply filtered out of the final report so as not to spoil the beautiful, smooth curve of the natural cycle. But it was there, recorded by dozens of stations around the world. And it happened at a very, very specific moment. To understand just how specific, we need to lift our gaze from the center of the Earth to the icy void of interstellar space. On December 22, 2022, 1 month before the publication of that Nature article, the automated Atlas telescope system in Hawaii detected a faint, moving object. Initial calculations of its orbit revealed something extraordinary. This was not an asteroid from our belt. It wasn't even a comet from the distant Oort cloud. The object's trajectory was hyperbolic. This meant it had come from interstellar space and, after passing the sun, would leave our system forever. It was given the designation 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar visitor in the history of astronomical observation. The first was the mysterious cigar-shaped Oumuamua in 2017. The second was Comet 2I Borisov in 2019. And now, Atlas. The system immediately classified it as a comet. It's the simplest and safest explanation. But from the very beginning, Atlas behaved strangely. Very strangely. Unlike Comet Borisov, it showed almost no cometary activity. It had no bright coma, the cloud of gas and dust that forms when an icy nucleus is heated by the sun. The spectral analysis, done hastily before the object moved too far away, showed anomalies. Its composition didn't resemble any known comet or asteroid in our system. There were whispers of an unusually high content of refractory metals, but this data was never officially published in full. It was buried in archives under the label "Requires further verification." But the biggest oddity was its trajectory. It was too perfect. It entered the solar system at such an angle and with such a velocity that Jupiter's gravitational field barely distorted its path. It passed perihelion, its closest point to the sun, and began its journey out, moving along a trajectory that wasn't just random. It was resonant. Resonance in orbital mechanics is a powerful force. It's when two objects orbiting a third exert a periodic gravitational influence on each other, synchronizing their movements. Resonances shape the structure of our solar system. They create the gaps in the asteroid belt. They lock moons into stable orbits. It is cosmic choreography, governed by the laws of physics. In 3I Atlas, as it flew through our system, for a brief but critical period, from late December 2022 to late January 2023, occupied a unique position. It found itself at a point in space where its gravitational influence, amplified by the positions of other planets, entered into a complex, multi-level resonance not with a single object, but with the entire Earth-Moon system as a whole. This was an event so rare its probability approached zero. Amateur astronomers on private forums modeled the situation again and again. They couldn't believe it. A random interstellar wanderer couldn't just happen to hit this tiny gravitational keyhole. It was equivalent to throwing a grain of sand from Alpha Centauri and hitting the eye of a needle orbiting the sun at 30 kilometers per second, over 67,000 miles per hour. But it happened. And it was at this exact moment, the moment of maximum resonant impact, that seismographs around the world recorded that sharp braking impulse, in the very heart of the planet. The very same noise that was so conveniently scrubbed from the official reports. Let's put it all together one more time. On one side, we have the system. It offers us a story of a slow, natural, 70-year cycle. A story that is convenient, understandable, and requires no further questions. It is based on models built over decades of observation and dismisses short, sharp anomalies as insignificant noise. On the other side, we have facts that don't fit into this story. We have a mysterious interstellar object with anomalous characteristics. We have its arrival on a mathematically improbable, resonant trajectory. And we have a perfect, down-to-the-day, temporal correlation between its arrival at this unique point and an unprecedented breaking event in Earth's core, which official science chose to hide. Correlation, we are constantly reminded, does not equal causation. But when a correlation is this precise, this multifaceted, and this statistically impossible, ignoring it is no longer scientific caution. It is willful blindness. It is choosing not to see what is happening right in front of your eyes. The question we must ask is no longer, what is happening to Earth's core? The question is now different. What if our planet's inner core is not just an inert lump of iron? What if a giant ball of metal spinning in an ocean of liquid metal is in fact the largest dynamo one could possibly imagine? And what if someone from the outside, possessing technology we cannot even conceive, has learned how to plug into it? What if 3i Atlas is not a comet? What if it's a probe, a station, or even an entire vehicle that arrived in our system with one single purpose: to refuel? And for this refueling, it is using the most powerful energy source in the vicinity, the rotational kinetic energy of our world's heart. The slowing of the core is not a natural cycle. It is the side effect of a gigantic, invisible force field, creating a magnetic break, siphoning rotational energy and converting it into something else. This is not a coincidence. This is choreography. And we are not just witnesses. We are living on the battery that has just been plugged into a charger. And no one bothered to ask our permission. To understand how deep the rabbit hole we're falling into is, you must first appreciate its architects. The system doesn't lie outright. That would be too crude, too simple. Instead, it creates elegant, almost hermetic narratives. It builds intellectual cathedrals where every detail seems logical, every pillar is in its place. And the official version of the core's slowdown, the trickster event as we now call it, is a masterpiece of this architecture. Let's step inside and look around, not as tourists, but as engineers searching for hidden flaws in the design. The official explanation, which you'll be offered at any university from Cambridge to Caltech, rests on two fundamental forces: gravity and electromagnetism. Imagine the solid inner core and the solid outer mantle, separated by a giant ocean of liquid metal. The outer core. They are not perfectly smooth. At the core mantle boundary, there are giant mountains and valleys, regions of slightly higher and lower density, a topography stretching for thousands of kilometers. Likewise, the surface of the solid inner core is also believed to be uneven. Gravitational coupling is, essentially, the attraction between these irregularities. A dense patch of the mantle drags, a protrusion on the inner core, trying to synchronize their rotation, like two imperfect gears meshing through a viscous fluid. It's a very weak but constant force. The second, and perhaps more powerful mechanism is electromagnetic coupling. Remember, the outer core is not just molten metal. It's a conductor in which convection currents rage. The movement of this conductor within the existing magnetic field generates powerful electric currents, which in turn create and sustain the Earth's magnetic field itself. This is the principle of the geodynamo. This magnetic field permeates everything, both the liquid outer core and the solid inner one. It acts as an invisible but incredibly strong clutch. Any change in the liquid metal flows, or in the magnetic field itself, can strengthen or weaken this grip, causing the inner core to either speed up or slow down relative to the mantle. In this model, the 70-year cycle is a natural oscillation. For about 35 years, gravitational and electromagnetic forces combine in such a way that the core receives a small extra impulse and begins to rotate slightly faster than the rest of the planet. Then, the balance of forces slowly shifts. Electromagnetic braking increases. The gravitational grip changes its configuration. The core begins to smoothly slow down until it reaches a point of synchronization, as officially happened in 2009, and then just as smoothly begins to lag behind until the cycle reaches its opposite point and starts all over again. It's beautiful. It's logical. It explains all the historical data gathered over the last 60 years. It explains everything, except for one thing. Except for that sharp, wild scream the planet uttered in late 2022. To hear that scream, you need to understand how scientists listen to the core in the first place. We can't drill a hole 5,000 kilometers, about 3,100 miles, deep. The only tool we have are seismic waves from earthquakes. When a powerful tremor occurs somewhere in Indonesia, it generates waves that spread throughout the entire planet. Some of them, the so-called P waves, or compressional waves, are able to pass through the liquid outer core, and even through the solid inner core. As they pass through these layers, they refract and change speed, just as light refracts in a glass of water. Seismographs on the other side of the planet, say, in Brazil, record the arrival time of these waves. Now, imagine we have two nearly identical earthquakes, occurring in the same location, but 10 or 20 years apart. These are called seismic doublets. If the planet were static, the waves from both earthquakes would travel along the exact same path and arrive in Brazil with the same delay. But the core is spinning. In the 10 years between the earthquakes, it has rotated slightly. This means the wave from the second earthquake will pass through a slightly different part of the core. It will refract at a different angle, travel a different path, and its arrival time will change by hundredths or even thousandths of a second. By measuring this tiny time difference for hundreds of doublets around the world, geophysicists calculate the core's rotation speed. It's painstaking, delicate work, and for decades, it's this work that has shown that smooth, beautiful sine wave of the 70-year cycle. Now, imagine you're sitting in the digital archive of IRIS, the Incorporated Research Institutions for Seismology. It's one of the world's largest public repositories of seismic data. You request not the processed reports, but the raw waveforms, terabytes of unprocessed information from thousands of stations worldwide. You take that specific time interval, from 2022 to 2023, and you start looking. You see the planet's usual background noise, the hum of the oceans, distant earthquakes, even the vibration from highways. And then, in the data from late December 2022, you find it. It doesn't look like an earthquake. An earthquake has a clear signature. First the fast P wave arrives, then the slower S wave. Here, there's nothing like that. It's a short, high-frequency burst, a global ring that was recorded almost simultaneously by stations on every continent. It lasted only a few minutes. It's not in the official publications. The algorithms, trained to look for earthquake signatures, simply ignored it as anomalous noise. Perhaps a simultaneous equipment malfunction at several stations, which, though unlikely, is possible. But when you overlay this noise on the graph of the core's rotation, it takes your breath away. It is at this exact moment that the smooth curve of deceleration takes a sharp, almost vertical plunge. This isn't braking. It's a blow. It's as if you were riding a bicycle and gently applying the brakes, and then someone suddenly shoved a steel bar into your spokes. Natural processes don't behave like this. Gravitational and electromagnetic coupling are inherently inertial. They cannot produce such a sharp, globally synchronized impulse. It is physically impossible within the existing model. And there it is. The first real crack in the flawless cathedral of official science. You might think such a discovery would have caused a storm in the scientific community. But it didn't. Because the system has incredible inertia and built-in defense mechanisms. A single anomaly unconfirmed by a major institution that doesn't fit the accepted paradigm is almost always written off as observer error. You need someone else. Someone who saw the same thing. And such a voice was found. Not in the bold headlines of Nature or Science, but in a quiet, almost invisible corner of the digital world, on the preprint server archive.org. This is a place where scientists upload their work before official publication and peer review. In February 2023, a small group from the University of Helsinki, let's call them the Helsinki Geodynamics Group, published a short but explosive paper. They didn't talk about aliens or conspiracies. They just did their job. They analyzed that very noise. They proved its global, non-random nature. They showed that its source was not in the crust or mantle, but originated from the very center of the planet. And they gave it a name, the 2022 Geomagnetic Jerk. In their paper, they asked very polite but very uncomfortable questions. Why was this signal not included in global models? Why was it filtered out of the public data sets intended for general use? They speculated that this jerk could have been caused by a previously unknown rapid process at the inner-outer core boundary, perhaps a sudden collapse or reconfiguration of the magnetic field. They were cautious, but between the lines of their dry academic text was a deafening conclusion. The existing model of the 70-year cycle is not just incomplete. It is wrong. It cannot explain the most dramatic geophysical event of recent decades. The Finnish scientist's paper was on archive.org for exactly 2 weeks. It started gaining citations, getting noticed on specialized forums, and then it vanished. If you try to find it today by its title or authors, you'll get a 404 error, file not found. The official explanation, which later appeared in a short notice on the university's website, stated that the authors had withdrawn the paper for substantial revisions and further data verification. This is a standard procedure. But the paper never reappeared. Not in a revised form, not in any other form. It just evaporated, dissolved into the digital void. And this no longer looks like scientific routine. This looks like censorship. When you start digging deeper, the picture becomes even more disturbing. You decide to check the primary sources. You go back to the IRIS portal and other global seismological archives like those belonging to the U.S. Geological Survey, and you discover something astonishing. The raw waveforms for that critical period from December 20th, 2022 to January 5th, 2023 are still available. But now, they have a special flag attached to them. A label that reads, "Warning. Data may contain uncompensated instrumental artifacts. Use for precise analysis is not recommended until full recalibration is complete." A full recalibration that, according to the status, has never been initiated. This is a masterpiece of bureaucratic concealment. The data hasn't been deleted. It has simply been discredited. It has been marked as unreliable, turning potential evidence into trash. Any graduate student or scientist who stumbles upon this data and wants to analyze it will see this warning and most likely just move on, so as not to jeopardize their reputation by working with dirty data. This is not a mistake. This is not an accident. This is a choice. It is a deliberate action aimed at discouraging any independent researcher from looking at this specific point in time. They didn't just ignore the anomaly. They built a digital wall around it. They hung a "Beware of Dog" sign, hoping no one would dare to peek over the fence. And this changes everything, because now we know. It's not that their model was wrong. It's that they encountered data that didn't just contradict their model, but shattered its very foundation. And instead of admitting it, they decided to bury that data under a layer of bureaucratic ambiguity. The question is no longer whether they are mistaken. The question is, what are they so desperately trying to hide? When the system buries a piece of evidence, it doesn't use a shovel. It uses protocol. When it builds a wall of silence, it builds it not with bricks, but with procedures. To detect such a wall, you need to know the architecture of power, to understand how official information flows. And you need to know exactly where to look for the cracks, the faults, and most importantly, the voids. The "use not recommended" tag on the seismic data was the first crack. The withdrawn paper by the Finnish geophysicists was the first fault. But to find the real void, the gaping chasm that points to a deliberate cover-up, we needed to shift the focus of our investigation. We had to look away from the heart of the Earth, which was screaming in silence, and look again at the alleged perpetrator, at the interstellar visitor, 3I Atlas. And for that, we needed the most powerful, most precise, and most impartial witness humanity has ever created, the Gaia Space Telescope. For you to understand the scale, Gaia is not just a telescope. It is a cosmic cartographer, the great census taker of the galaxy. Launched by the European Space Agency, ESA, in 2013, it is stationed at Lagrange Point L2, 1.5 million kilometers, nearly a million miles, from Earth, in a perfect spot for continuous sky surveys. Its sole mission is to methodically, time and again, scan the entire sky, measuring with unimaginable precision the position, motion, brightness, and color of every light source that enters its field of view. It measures the parallax of stars, the tiny shift in their apparent position caused by Earth's orbit around the Sun, and from that, calculates their distance with an accuracy equivalent to measuring the diameter of a human hair from 2,000 kilometers, about 1,250 miles, away. Over its years of operation, Gaia has cataloged nearly 2 billion stars. It has created a three-dimensional map of our corner of the Milky Way, so detailed that previous star atlases look like children's drawings next to it. But Gaia doesn't only see stars. It sees everything that moves against their background. Asteroids, comets, exoplanets. It is the absolute objective eye. It does not interpret. It simply measures. And that is why its data is considered the gold standard in astronomy. The information Gaia collects is so colossal that it's impossible to publish in real time. It is processed by giant computing clusters on Earth at the European Space Astronomy Center, ESEC, in Spain, and published in batches, known as data releases, or DRs. Each such release is a global event for astronomers. It's like the opening of a new Library of Alexandria, but in digital form. Scientists worldwide wait for this data for years to test their theories, make new discoveries, and peer into the most hidden corners of the cosmos. And when 3I Atlas streaked through our system, the entire astronomical community knew. Gaia's next data release, DR4, would contain the most accurate information ever recorded about this object. Everyone was waiting for this specific data. It was supposed to end all debates. Did Atlas have a coma, invisible to ground-based telescopes? Were there non-gravitational accelerations in its motion, indicating outgassing like a normal comet? Or something else? What was its precise photometric curve, which could reveal its shape and rotation speed? Gaia was supposed to provide the answers. Objective, irrefutable, mathematically precise answers. On May 25th, 2023, after a few minor delays, ESA finally opened access to a portion of the DR4 release. Millions of astronomers and amateurs around the world flocked to the download portals. The digital floodgates opened, and the search began. In the databases, every object has a unique identifier. Researchers typed the designation assigned by the Minor Planet Center into the search bar, 3I Atlas, and waited. A second of waiting stretched into an eternity. And then the system returned an answer. The record was found. The identifier was correct. The object was in the catalog. But then a chill ran down the spine. All the fields where the numbers should have been. Astrometry, photometry, parallax, radial velocity were empty. They contained only one word: null, zero, a void. Next to it was a short, chilling note: data under internal review, release pending. This wasn't just a lack of information. It was something far worse. It was an admission that the information exists, but we would not be shown it. It was a digital ghost, a silhouette outlined by emptiness. In the place of the most important data set on the most mysterious object of the decade, there was a perfectly carved out black hole. Let's dive into the context so you can grasp the full anomaly of this situation. ESA's data publication protocols are almost sacred texts, honed by decades of practice. Yes, some data can be temporarily withheld, or, as scientists say, placed under embargo. This is usually done so that the teams working directly with the instrument have the first opportunity to analyze and publish their results. It's their right, their reward for years of work. But such an embargo always has clear, predetermined timelines. 6 months, a year, 2 at most. And it is never, absolutely never, applied to so-called transient phenomena, events that pass quickly and will not be repeated. Supernovae, gamma-ray bursts, and of course, interstellar comets. What is the point of hiding data about an object that has already flown away at 50 kilometers per second, over 110,000 miles per hour, and will never return? From a scientific perspective, it's absurd. It's like the police finding a unique fingerprint at a crime scene and then locking it in a safe with a note that says, "We'll show you in 2 years." By then, the perpetrator will be on the other side of the world. Hiding the data on 3I Atlas made no scientific sense, but it made administrative sense. If you want to hide something, but you can't just delete it because you know hundreds of people saw you find it. A few hours later, as a wave of confusion rose on forums and social media, ESA released a short, extremely vague statement. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic language, designed not to explain, but to end questions. The statement said that processing the data for Object 3I Atlas had encountered unprecedented complexities. Allegedly, the object's high velocity combined with its atypical photometric signature led to errors in the automatic processing algorithms. The data, it was claimed, required manual verification and the development of a new calibration protocol, which could take an indefinite amount of time. At first glance, this sounds convincing. A complex object, complex algorithms. But for anyone even slightly familiar with how Gaia works, this explanation crumbles to dust. Gaia has successfully tracked hundreds of thousands of asteroids and comets in our solar system, many of which move on very elongated and fast orbits. It has seen objects with all sorts of photometric curves. Its algorithms are designed precisely to handle complexities. The idea that a single object, albeit a fast one, could break the most advanced astronomical data processing system in the world was not just unlikely. It was an insult to the hundreds of engineers and programmers who built that system. No. The reason wasn't that the data was bad. The reason was that it was too good, too precise, and too shocking. It showed something that the system could neither explain nor ignore. So it chose a third path: concealment. Let's imagine for a second that we are an analyst at ESAC who first saw this data on their screen. What could they have found? What could have forced ESA's top leadership to take the unprecedented step of cutting a piece out of its main asset, the public archive? The first thing that comes to mind is motion. Gaia's astrometry would have allowed them to track Atlas's trajectory with an accuracy of a few meters. And if this trajectory revealed even the slightest, but statistically significant, deviation from a purely gravitational path, a deviation that couldn't be blamed on outgassing, it would be direct proof of the object having its own propulsion system. It would turn the comet into a craft. Second is shape. Gaia scans objects multiple times, passing over them at different angles. Analysis of the brightness variation, the photometric curve, allows for reconstruction of the object's shape. If this curve turned out not to be chaotic, like that of a shapeless asteroid, but strictly periodic, with sharp edges, it would point to a regular, geometric, i.e., artificial, shape. Third, and most importantly, is spectroscopy. Gaia is equipped with a spectrometer that breaks down the light from an object into a rainbow, allowing its chemical composition to be determined. What if the spectrum of 3I Atlas revealed absorption lines corresponding not to natural minerals, but to complex industrial alloys, titanium-tungsten composites, or even elements not on our periodic table? Any one of these discoveries would have been a sensation, but together, they would become irrefutable proof. Proof that humanity, in the system's opinion, is not yet ready for. And they pressed the pause button. They created this void in the archive, hoping that during the indefinite period of manual verification, they would either find a way to correctly interpret the data, or the problem itself would fade from public attention. But this void, this ghost in the machine, became the loudest piece of evidence of all. The silence was not accidental. It was an answer to what Gaia saw in those few weeks as Atlas flew by. But the most terrifying hypothesis is something else. What if they weren't hiding data about the object itself? What if Gaia, with its superhuman precision, recorded not just Atlas itself, but its effect on the surrounding space? A barely noticeable but measurable distortion of light from distant stars as it passed them. A gravitational lensing effect that was orders of magnitude stronger than it should have been for an object of its mass. Or, even more incredibly, a subtle, barely perceptible energy trail stretching from the object towards Earth. What if they were hiding not what Atlas was, but what it was doing, right at that moment? What if Gaia's data contained not just a picture of the key, but a recording of that key turning in the lock of our world? This is no longer a scientific anomaly. This is an act of aggression, recorded at the most fundamental level. And the silence that followed was not just a cover-up. It was a deafening alarm bell that no one, it seems but us, was willing to hear. In any complex system, be it a bureaucracy or a computer network, there are blind spots. These are not mistakes. They are a design feature. Areas where the system deliberately does not look, because looking in that direction could disrupt its internal stability. It creates them with protocols, instructions, and unwritten rules. The void in the Gaia archives was just such a carefully constructed blind spot. An information desert created to stop any independent investigation. But the creators of this desert forgot one simple truth. Nature abhors a vacuum. And if the system creates a blind spot, there will always be someone who lives and hunts in the shadows. Someone for whom the official channels are noise, and the gaps in the data are a treasure map. In information warfare, this archetype has been known for a long time. But in our story, it has a name. And that name is the Oracle. The Oracle is not one person. It is not a prophet sitting in a cave. In the 21st century, the Oracle is a decentralized, anonymous network, a collective mind composed of hundreds of independent observers, programmers, engineers, and simply obsessed enthusiasts scattered across the globe. They are united not by a desire for fame or money, but by a fundamental mistrust of official narratives and an almost religious faith in the power of raw, unprocessed data. They are digital samurai, following a code of complete information transparency. One of the most powerful nodes in this network is known by the code name Project Argus. The name was not chosen by chance. In Greek mythology, Argus was a many-eyed giant who could never be caught off guard because some of his eyes were always awake. The modern Argus is a global network of more than 30 robotic telescopes located in the darkest places on the planet, from the high-altitude deserts of Chile to the volcanic peaks of the Canary Islands and private observatories in the arid regions of Australia. These are not giant multi-meter mirrors like those of NASA or ESA. More often, they are modest half-meter or 1-meter instruments. But their strength is not in size, but in specialization and total synchronization. Each telescope in the Argus network is equipped not with a standard CCD sensor, but with a unique, custom-built instrument, a high-speed streaming polarimeter. To understand what this is, imagine light as a wave. Usually, light from a distant star or reflected from the rocky surface of a comet is unpolarized. Its waves oscillate in all possible planes. It is light chaos. But if light reflects off a smooth, ordered surface, like glass, water, or polished metal, it becomes polarized. Its waves begin to oscillate predominantly in one plane. A polarimeter is an instrument that measures this degree of order in light. It sees what a normal camera cannot. It sees the very texture of the surface at a subatomic level. And herein lies the genius of Argus. They weren't trying to compete with the system at its own game, getting ultra-sharp images. They were playing their own game. They knew that any artificial technological surface, be it a solar panel, a metal hull, or a force shield, would leave a unique polarization signature in the reflected light. A signature that cannot be faked and is very easy to distinguish from natural chaos. They weren't looking for ships. They were looking for their fingerprints in the light itself. When 3i Atlas appeared in the sky, Project Argus immediately trained the full power of its network on it. While the big observatories waited their turn for observation time and battled bureaucracy, the 30 telescopes of Argus began a round-the-clock, continuous patrol. They weren't taking beautiful photos for the press. Every millisecond they were collecting trillions of photons, passing them through their polarization filters and analyzing the results in real time with a self-learning neural network. Their servers, located in Iceland and powered by geothermal energy, hummed as they sifted through this ocean of information. For the first few weeks, nothing unusual turned up. The polarization of light from Atlas was low, chaotic, completely consistent with what one would expect from a giant chunk of dirty ice and rock. It was almost a disappointment. And then the system published its statement about the problems with the Gaia data. To the world, it was a technical notice. To Argus, it was a call to battle. They understood. The system had found something, and that something was hidden precisely in the photometric signature. They redoubled their efforts. On January 27th, 2023, note the date. This is the height of that resonant window we talked about, and just 4 days after the publication of the article on the core's slowdown, what they were waiting for happened. An operator monitoring the data stream from a telescope in Chile, let's call him Marco, saw the graphs on his monitor go haywire. The neural network, which until then had been monotonously flagging all signals as natural noise, suddenly sounded an alarm, painting the screen red and issuing a notification. Non-stochastic coherent modulation detected. In plain language, A structure had appeared in the light reflected from Atlas. The polarization was no longer chaotic. It had jumped to an unprecedented 70%, a level characteristic of perfectly smooth metallic surfaces. But that was only the beginning. The most shocking part was something else. This high polarization was not constant. It pulsed. It changed with incredible speed and in a strict, mathematically precise sequence. These were not random flashes. This was a complex repeating pattern. A sequence of short and long pulses, resembling something between Morse code and a data transmission diagram in a fiber optic cable. The pulsation lasted for exactly 11 minutes and 36 seconds, and then just as suddenly, it stopped. The light from Atlas once again became boring, chaotic, natural. This was the smoking gun. It perfectly filled the void left by the system. Recall ESA's official explanation, an atypical photometric signature that broke their algorithms. Of course, it broke them. Gaia's algorithms were trained on the slow, smooth changes in brightness and polarization characteristic of rotating asteroids or outgassing comets. They were not prepared for a signal that behaved like a digital data packet being transmitted at several gigahertz. They encountered technology, and their scientific instruments simply couldn't classify it, producing a series of errors. Argus, on the other hand, was looking for exactly this. Their system was designed to detect such anomalies. They caught the signal not because their telescopes were bigger, but because their philosophy was different. They didn't try to fit reality into their models. They were prepared for reality to be much, much stranger. So what did they see? What did this 11-minute transmission mean? Was it a side effect of some system on board Atlas? Perhaps an energy shield that activated for a short time to protect the object from a solar flare? Or more likely, was it the effect of that very propulsion system that, at that exact moment, was creating the magnetic braking and siphoning energy from Earth's core? The pulsation of polarization could have been simply the exhaust of this giant, invisible engine. But there is a third, most disturbing hypothesis. What if it wasn't a side effect? What if it was a targeted data transmission? Not to us, of course. Perhaps Atlas was simply sending a status report on the refueling to its distant recipient. 11 minutes is enough time to transmit a colossal amount of information. And if so, we didn't just record the presence of technology. We overheard someone else's conversation. A conversation held in a language we cannot yet understand, but the very fact of which changes everything. We are no longer alone in a dark room. We just heard someone flip a switch on the other side of it. The discovery of Project Argus was quietly published on their own private server and distributed through encrypted channels to other cells of seekers. They didn't send it to nature. They knew it would either not be published or be buried under an avalanche of criticism and accusations of calibration errors. But their work was already done. They had given us the missing piece of the puzzle. They had turned suspicion into certainty. But the story didn't end there, because the discovery inspired their next step. If this unique polarization signature, this pulse, is the fingerprint of an unknown technology, could it have appeared before? They aimed their neural network not at the future, but at the past. They fed it terabytes of old, archived polarimetric data from all the public archives they could find. Data that had been gathering dust on magnetic tapes for decades because no one knew what to look for in it. And the neural network began to find things. It found a faint, barely discernible trace of the same pattern in data from 2017, related to the flyby of Oumuamua. It found even stranger, fragmented bursts and observations of certain centaurs, mysterious objects orbiting between Jupiter and Neptune. The pulse captured by Argus from 3i Atlas was not just an anomaly. It was a signature, a trademark. And this signature began to appear in the most unexpected places, like graffiti left by an invisible artist on the walls of the solar system. And the biggest question now was no longer what Atlas was. The biggest question was, how many more carriers of this signature are hiding in the shadows, patiently waiting for their turn? When you have a fragment like the polarization signature from Project Argus in your hands, the very nature of the investigation changes. You stop wandering in the dark, stumbling upon random facts. You have a thread. And now your task is to pull it, unraveling a tangle that turns out to be much larger, more complex, and more terrifying than you could have imagined. And as you start pulling, you discover that this thread leads not only into the cold abyss of space, but also deep into our own, very recent history. You discover that the trickster event, the slowing of the core, and the arrival of Atlas, is not the beginning of the drama. It is merely the climax of the second act. The first act was played out long before, in silence and almost unnoticed. And to see it, we need to connect the scattered dots on the map of time and space and form a single, frightening trajectory. We need to build what might be called the conspiracy map. Let's start with the origin point, the foundation. This is not speculation, but a fact acknowledged by the system. The beginning of the sharp, final phase of the Earth's core slowdown, according to the most conservative geophysical models, dates to around 2009. It was then that the long-term trend of rotational acceleration was replaced by a trend of deceleration. The official version, as we remember, is that this is the natural inflection point in the 70-year cycle. But let's set aside this convenient hypothesis for a moment and look at this event as an anomaly, as year zero on our chronological map. What else was happening in global science and technology around 2009? At first glance, nothing special that could affect the planet's core. But if you look closely at one specific area, radio astronomy, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, the picture changes. It was in 2009 that an event occurred which insiders call the Great Silence. For decades, the SETI program operated on a simple principle. Large radio telescopes, like Arecibo or the Allen Telescope Array, scanned the sky for narrowband, artificial signals on certain magic frequencies, such as the emission frequency of neutral hydrogen. It was a passive hunt. They just listened, hoping someone would be shouting loudly enough. But in the mid-2000s, a new, much more aggressive philosophy began to gain traction. METI, or messaging to extraterrestrial intelligence. Proponents of METI, such as the maverick American astronomer Dr. Adrian Vance, argued that passive waiting was pointless. To get an answer, you first have to ask a question. Starting in the late 90s, using the giant 305-meter Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico, they began sending powerful, targeted radio messages into space towards nearby stars. These messages, known as the Arecibo interstellar calls, contained everything from the basics of mathematics and physics to images of humans and the structure of DNA. They were the most powerful and complex signals ever sent into space by humankind. And then, in 2008, after the last such transmission, the US government, which funded the facility, suddenly and without clear explanation, cut funding for the program and shut it down. Officially, it was due to budget constraints. But behind the scenes, there were whispers of something else. Whispers of pressure from international partners, of growing anxiety in the scientific community about the consequences of such cosmic chatter. Stephen Hawking would later state it bluntly: if you meet a stranger in a dark forest, you don't shout out your location. And so, from 2009, the Great Silence fell upon planet Earth. All major METI projects were shelved. Humanity went quiet. And it was at this very moment that the Earth's core began to slow down. A coincidence? Perhaps. But on our map, this is the first alarming data point, as if someone heard our shout and began to slowly, very slowly, turn their head in our direction. Let's fast forward. The next key point on our map is October 2017. The official date of the discovery of the first interstellar visitor, One-Eye Oumuamua. This object remains one of astronomy's greatest mysteries. An elongated cigar-like shape, inferred from its light curve. A dark, reddish color, unlike any asteroid or comet. And most importantly, non-gravitational acceleration. Oumuamua was moving away from the sun faster than it should have, and this acceleration could not be explained by outgassing, as it had no coma or tail. The head of Harvard's astronomy department, Avi Loeb, openly suggested it could be an artificial object, a solar sail, or an alien probe. The system, of course, found a more prosaic explanation. Oumuamua was a hydrogen iceberg, or a nitrogen shard, exotic hypotheses that nevertheless allowed the status quo to be maintained. But now, let's look at this event through the lens of our investigation. Remember, the Argus neural network found traces of that same polarization signature in the archived data for Oumuamua. Faint, but statistically significant. Now let's overlay this with geophysics. What was happening with the Earth's core rotation in 2017? It was during this period that several independent groups of geophysicists, including one from France's National Center for Scientific Research, recorded a short but sharp period of stagnation in the slowdown. For several months, the deceleration curve became almost flat, as if the braking force had suddenly weakened and then resumed. It was a micro-anomaly within the global anomaly, written off at the time as measurement error. But now it looks different. It looks like a dress rehearsal, a short-term test of the system conducted by the first scout, Oumuamua, which flew by, touched the planetary dynamo, registered the effect, and moved on, passing the baton to the next. And so, we arrive at the main act, the events of 2022. But to understand their scale, we need to add another, seemingly unrelated layer to our map. A technological layer. December 2021. Humanity launches its most advanced, most complex, and most expensive scientific instrument in history into space, the James Webb Space Telescope, JWST. It, like Gaia, heads to the L2 Lagrange point. Its mission is to peer into the earliest epochs of the universe, to see the light of the first stars and galaxies. It is a triumph of human ingenuity. But this triumph had a hidden, unpublicized side. To protect its ultra-sensitive infrared detectors from the heat of the sun and Earth, the Webb is equipped with a giant 5-layer sun shield the size of a tennis court. This shield creates a perfect, deep shadow behind the telescope, a region of absolute cold and darkness, a perfect hiding spot, a perfect blind spot. And it was into this blind spot, according to trajectory calculations, that 3i Atlas was set to pass during the most critical part of its approach to Earth. It was scheduled to pass directly behind the Webb from the perspective of ground-based observers. A coincidence? Mathematically possible, but diabolically lucky. Like a burglar deciding to crack a safe at the exact moment the guard turns away to watch a fireworks display. Now let's assemble the complete picture. Here it is, our conspiracy map. Our choreography played out over a 15-year timeline. Step 1, 2009. Humanity ceases its active attempts to announce its presence to the universe. Almost immediately, an inexplicable but smooth deceleration of the Earth's inner core rotation begins. This looks like a slow, gradual target acquisition. A lock-on. Step 2, 2017. The first scout, One-Eye Oumuamua, arrives. It carries the same technological signature we will see later. It conducts a short-term test, pinging the planet's geodynamo, which is reflected as a brief anomaly in the core's deceleration rate. A systems check. Step 3, 2021 to 2022. Humanity unwittingly moves the perfect cover into the perfect position, the sun shield of the James Webb Space Telescope, We build them the ideal hiding spot ourselves. Step 4, December 2022. The main operative 3I Atlas arrives. It enters the system on an incredibly precise resonant orbit, using the web as a temporary shield from detection. It takes its position. Step 5, late December 2022 to late January 2023. Atlas activates its primary system. Argus detects a powerful polarization flare. At the same moment, seismographs all over Earth register an unprecedented braking impulse, the geomagnetic jerk, the main phase of the operation. Energy extraction. Step 6, January to May 2023. The system begins its cover-up operation. A reassuring article about a natural cycle is published. Anomalous seismic data is flagged as unreliable. The Finnish scientist's paper disappears. The Gaia data, which could reveal the entire picture, is placed under indefinite lock and key, covering the tracks. When you look at this chain of events, the hypothesis of random coincidences begins to fall apart. This no longer looks like chance. This looks like a plan. A methodical, multi-stage operation, planned by a mind that thinks in decades and uses the laws of celestial mechanics with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. And in this frightening picture, one final detail emerges. Our map points to something more than just refueling. Look at the timestamps. The start of the operation coincides with the cessation of our attempts to signal our presence. The climax occurs precisely when we launch our most advanced eye into space. This doesn't look like the indifferent use of a natural resource. This looks like a response, a reaction. Perhaps they aren't just refueling. Perhaps they are disarming us. Slowly, carefully, but inexorably, they are breaking the engine of our world, weakening our protective shield. Why? To make us more vulnerable? To prepare the planet for something else? This question takes us beyond astronomy and geophysics into the realm of existential horror. All the threads of this conspiracy seem to lead to one place, to one agency, one structure. Not NASA, not ESA, but to a quiet, almost unknown committee at the United Nations that deals with outer space affairs. A committee whose protocols were secretly and hastily rewritten in late 2008, just before the Great Silence began. And it is there, in the dry lines of bureaucratic documents, that the key may lie to understanding why the system is so desperately trying to make us believe that this is all just a dream, just another turn in the slow dance of a planet. Any conspiracy, no matter how vast, obeys one simple iron law, formulated by the ancient Romans. Cui bono? Who benefits? Who profits from the concealment of the truth? If we want to understand why the system is building a wall of silence around the events of late 2022 with such desperate resolve, we must for a moment set aside the telescopes and seismographs and immerse ourselves in a much murkier and more dangerous environment, the psychology of power and the geopolitics of knowledge. We must understand that for the system, this impersonal conglomerate of governments, scientific institutions, and intelligence agencies, truth is not an absolute value. The primary value is stability, the preservation of the existing order. And from this perspective, the emergence of irrefutable proof that someone from the outside is actively and purposefully influencing our planet is not a scientific discovery. It is an existential threat to the very foundations of civilization. Let's conduct a thought experiment. Imagine you are not an independent truth seeker, but a person sitting in a so-called situation room. You are the head of NASA, or the Secretary of Defense, or the director of the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, and one morning, a folder stamped Top Secret lands on your desk. Inside is the raw Gaia data, the polarization analysis from Argus, the geophysicists' report on the geomagnetic jerk, and perhaps something else we don't even know about. data from military surveillance satellites that will never be made public. The conclusions in this folder are unequivocal. An extraterrestrial technological object is artificially slowing the rotation of Earth's core. It is a fact. What do? Your first instinctive impulse is to tell the world, to call a press conference, to speak at the UN. But your second impulse, trained by years of crisis management, will be entirely different. You will begin to calculate the consequences. And that's where the real horror begins. Consequence number 1, the total collapse of financial markets. Our global economy is a fragile construct built on faith in a predictable future. Stocks, bonds, currencies, futures. These are all bets that tomorrow will be like today. The news that the very planet we live on has become the subject of external influence would shatter that faith in an instant. No one knows how this breaking will end. Will the magnetic field weaken? Will the climate change? Will volcanic activity increase? This uncertainty is absolute poison to the markets. We would see a crash that would make the Great Depression look like a mild recession. Trillions of dollars would turn to dust in a matter of hours. A global panic would ensue, with people rushing to withdraw money from banks where it no longer exists. Collapse. Consequence number 2, social and religious chaos. Billions of people on this planet base their lives on belief systems, religious, philosophical, ideological, in which humanity occupies a central, unique place. The revelation of the existence not just of extraterrestrial life, but of a civilization capable of manipulating planets, would strike a devastating blow to these beliefs. Some would see the aliens as gods, others as demons. New cults would emerge, worshipping the celestial mechanics. Old religions would splinter between those who try to integrate the new reality into their dogma and those who declare it a diabolical temptation. Mass riots, religious wars, and witch hunts would begin. Governments would lose their monopoly on the interpretation of reality, and with it, their legitimacy. Chaos. Consequence number 3, the most dangerous from a geopolitical standpoint. An arms race of unimaginable scale. As soon as it becomes known that a technology exists that can influence the planet's core, every country with any scientific resources would throw all its efforts into figuring out how it works, and not to defend themselves, but to replicate it. Imagine a weapon capable of weakening the magnetic shield over an enemy nation, leaving it defenseless against solar radiation. A weapon capable of triggering a chain of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions by altering tectonic stress in the crust. It would be the ultimate weapon, compared to which the nuclear bomb is just a club. A desperate, insane race to possess this technology would begin. Fear and mistrust between nations would reach a boiling point. Any local conflict could escalate into a planetary catastrophe. It would be the last war in human history. And so you sit in your situation room, running these scenarios through your head, and you arrive at the only possible conclusion, from your perspective. The truth is toxic. The truth is a virus capable of killing civilization. And your main task is not to reveal it, but to quarantine it, at any cost. And so, you begin to act. You give the order. Geophysicists are politely but firmly advised to withdraw their paper for further verification. Astronomers at ESA are explained that releasing the raw Gaia data is a threat to national and international security. A simple, understandable, and most importantly, safe narrative about a natural cycle is fed to the public. All anomalies are blamed on instrumental errors. An architecture of silence is erected around the truth. This is not a malevolent conspiracy in the style of movie villains who want to take over the world. This is an act of desperation. It is a decision made by people convinced they are saving humanity from itself. They are hiding the truth, not because they are evil. They are hiding it because they believe us, the common people, are not mature enough to handle it. They have chosen the role of the last line of defense between a fragile world and a terrifying reality. Historical analogies here are more than appropriate. Recall the Manhattan Project. Thousands of scientists and engineers worked for years in complete secrecy to create the atomic bomb. They knew they were building a weapon capable of destroying the world, but the official cover story was the development of a new energy source. Recall the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, when the Johnson administration used fabricated data about an attack on American destroyers to get congressional approval for a full-scale invasion of Vietnam. Recall the CIA's MK-Ultra program, in which thousands of unsuspecting U.S. and Canadian citizens were subjected to mind control experiments using psychotropic drugs and torture. In all these cases, the system operated under the same logic. The ends justify the means. For the sake of preserving national security or stability, one can lie, conceal, and manipulate. A lie is just another tool in the arsenal of governance, and there is no reason to believe they would have acted any differently in the case of Three-Eye Atlas. On the contrary, the stakes here are immeasurably higher. This is not about a regional war or mind control. This is about the survival of the species. But there is a fundamental flaw in this logic of concealment. What if their motive is not just to protect us from panic? What if there is another hidden variable in this equation? What if they are hiding the truth, not to buy time for all of humanity, but to buy it for themselves? Imagine that you not only know about the existence of this technology, but you are beginning to understand it. By analyzing the geomagnetic jerk and the polarization signature, your best minds conclude that it is theoretically possible to create not only a defensive field, but a retaliatory weapon, or even more valuable, to establish contact, to begin a dialogue. And whoever does this first will gain an absolute advantage. Technological, military, intellectual. It would be a leap comparable to going from a stone axe to thermonuclear fusion overnight. The temptation to monopolize this contact, to hide it from everyone else in order to use it for one's own benefit, would be irresistible. And then concealment is no longer an act of self-defense. It is preparation for the next stage of the game, a stage in which the rest of humanity is relegated to the role of passive spectators, or worse, expendable pawns. They are hiding the truth not to protect us from chaos. They are hiding it to prepare a response that we will never be told about. They are building an ark, but only the chosen few will get tickets. And while we discuss beautiful graphs of a 70-year cycle somewhere in deep underground bunkers, the best minds on the planet are already working on how to turn the greatest threat in history into the greatest advantage. And that is a far more terrifying motive than a simple desire to prevent panic. It is betrayal on a planetary scale. Let's set aside the conspiracy maps and geopolitical motives. Let's forget about the consequences for a moment and focus on the source, on the object, Three-Eye Atlas itself. The system wants us to see it as a comet, a mindless, inert chunk of ice and rock that accidentally wandered into our neighborhood. But the evidence we've gathered points to something entirely different. It's time to perform an autopsy. Not a physical one, of course, but an informational one. We will gather every single fragment of data, from the official but incomplete to the alternative but revolutionary, and conduct a detailed anatomical analysis of this visitor. We will look inside its trajectory, its composition, and its behavior. And what we find there will definitively shatter the convenient illusion of a natural origin. We will prove that Atlas is not a rock. It is a machine. The first organ we will dissect is its trajectory, its nervous system, the path it forged through the void. The official version is simple. It was a hyperbolic orbit. The object arrived from interstellar space with excess velocity. The sun's gravity bent its path, and it flew away, never to return. On paper, this looks flawless, Billions of comets in the Oort cloud at the edge of our system are constantly being dislodged from their orbits, either falling towards the sun or being ejected. Occasionally, one might arrive from another star system. It is a rare but statistically possible event. But, as always, the devil is in the details. And in the case of Atlas, these details turn a statistical rarity into a mathematical impossibility. As we've already discussed, Atlas didn't just enter our system. It occupied a unique resonant position relative to the Earth-Moon system. Let's break down what this means in practice. Imagine a billiard table the size of the solar system. The balls are the planets, constantly moving, creating an incredibly complex, ever-changing gravitational field. And you have to shoot a cue ball from outside this table in such a way that it not only flies past, but for a brief moment, hovers in one tiny spot where the vibrations from all the moving balls enter into perfect resonance. The probability of such a random shot is 0. Any astrophysicist will tell you that achieving such an orbit requires not luck, but calculation. It requires what is known in astronautics as a gravitational slingshot maneuver, or an orbital injection. This is an active, controlled action. The object must have had the ability to correct its course long before entering the system, perhaps thousands of astronomical units away from us. It had to aim for this invisible gravitational keyhole in advance. This is not the behavior of a comet, which passively succumbs to the force of gravity. This is the behavior of an interplanetary probe, like Voyager or Cassini, which uses the gravity of planets to accelerate or decelerate. Only in the case of Atlas, the scale of this maneuver surpasses anything we can imagine. It used not one planet, but the entire inner solar system as a single gravitational instrument to arrive at a designated point, at a designated time with surgical precision. This is not celestial mechanics. This is celestial engineering. But what if it's even more complex? What if we're not seeing the whole picture? The hypothesis of a controlled trajectory implies the object has an engine. But what if the engine was operating not only outside the system, but also within it? What if the non-gravitational acceleration that so puzzled scientists in the case of Oumuamua was also present in Atlas, but was so skillfully masked that we didn't notice it? Imagine an engine that works not on the principle of reactive thrust, by expelling mass, but by interacting with space-time itself, or with the interplanetary magnetic field. Such an engine could make microscopic but constant course corrections that, from Earth, would look like noise in the astrometric data. It could actively brake or accelerate, fitting perfectly into the gravitational landscape so that its true path was indistinguishable from a passive one. This is supreme piloting. It's like a submarine moving along the contours of the seabed to remain invisible to sonar. Atlas moved along the gravitational contours of the solar system. Its trajectory is not just a clue. It is a statement of technological superiority that is beyond our comprehension. Now let's open the chest cavity and look at its composition. What is this creature made of? The official version, based on the sparse spectral data obtained by ground-based telescopes, says it is an object rich in silicates and possibly water ice, covered with a dark organic crust. A typical comet. But this explanation is convenient only because it is based on incomplete and noisy data. We remember that the Gaia data, which could have provided the definitive answer, was classified. But the rumors that leaked from academic circles before the complete blackout told a different story. They spoke of abnormally strong absorption lines in the spectrum, corresponding not to silicates, but to refractory metals, such as tungsten, rhenium, and osmium. Let's think about what these metals are. Tungsten has the highest melting point of all known elements, almost 3,500 degrees Celsius, over 6,300 degrees Fahrenheit. Rhenium and osmium are among the densest and most durable substances in the universe. In nature, they are found in negligible quantities. On Earth, we use them in the most extreme applications. In rocket engine nozzles, in incandescent filaments, in armor-piercing cores, in contacts that withstand giant currents. These are not the materials nature uses to build comets. These are the materials that intelligence uses to build machines designed to operate in hell. Machines capable of passing dangerously close to a star without damage, withstanding colossal G-forces, and working with energies of unimaginable scale. The presence of these metals in Atlas's composition is like finding a titanium alloy in the bones of a dinosaur. It is an anomaly that screams its artificial origin. But here too, we may only be seeing the tip of the iceberg. What if the surface of Atlas is not just a passive alloy, but something far more complex? Remember the discovery by Project Argus, the 11-minute flash of coherent polarization. Such a phenomenon cannot be explained by light reflecting off a simple metal hull. It requires a surface with dynamically changing optical properties. It requires what is known in advanced physics as a metamaterial. A metamaterial is not just a substance, it is a structure. It is an artificially created lattice of microscopic elements engineered to control electromagnetic waves, including light, in completely unnatural ways. We on Earth are just beginning to experiment with such technologies, creating invisibility cloaks that can hide objects in the microwave range. The surface of Atlas could have been a metamaterial on a planetary scale, a dynamic skin capable of changing its reflectivity, polarization, and even thermal emission on command. That dark, organic crust our telescopes saw might have been just camouflage, a low observability mode. And that 11-minute flash was the moment the system switched to active mode. The moment this skin woke up and turned into a giant phased array antenna, transmitting or receiving a signal. This explains everything. The strange spectrum, the lack of a coma, and most importantly, the polarization pulse. This isn't an industrial alloy. This is an active surface. This is an organ. Finally, we come to the heart of our creature, its behavior, what it was doing while it was here. A comet, as it approaches the sun, behaves predictably. The ice on its surface begins to sublimate, turning into gas and carrying dust with it. A coma and a tail are formed. This process is chaotic. Gas erupts from cracks and geysers unevenly, creating those non-gravitational accelerations. Atlas behaved with an icy, dead calm. No coma, no tail, no chaos. Its silence was unnatural. But we now know that this was the calm before the storm. And that storm, the geomagnetic jerk and the polarization pulse, was not chaotic, but extremely ordered. Remember, the pulse lasted for exactly 11 minutes and 36 seconds, and it was synchronized with the braking impulse in Earth's core. This is not the behavior of a natural object. This is the work of a mechanism. This is the execution of a procedure. Let's assemble our anatomical chart. Before us is an object that arrived on a trajectory requiring intelligent control. It is made of materials used to create extreme machines. Its surface is an active, controllable metamaterial, and its only recorded action is a strictly synchronized, short operation that perfectly coincides in time with an unprecedented impact on our planet. There can be only one conclusion. 3i Atlas is not just a machine. It is a highly specialized tool. It is a giant unmanned probe whose sole function is to collect energy. It is a kind of cosmic parasite, or if you will, a mobile charging station. It arrives in a star system, finds a suitable source, a planet with an active geodynamo, connects to it using a force technology unknown to us, siphons the required amount of energy, and moves on. Our solar system, for it, is not a miracle of creation, but just one of many gas stations on the vast galactic highway. But the strangest and most frightening thing was not what it did. It was what it did after. Everyone was sure that after completing its maneuver, Atlas would depart on a hyperbolic trajectory out of the system. But the very last observations, conducted by several independent observatories after the object had dimmed significantly, showed something unimaginable. Its trajectory had changed. It was not leaving. After the gravitational maneuver around the sun that should have ejected it, it made another, barely perceptible course correction. It shed just enough velocity to remain gravitationally bound to the sun. Its new orbit is an incredibly elongated ellipse with a period of several thousand years. It did not leave. It stayed. It moved into position. A distant, dark, observational orbit somewhere beyond the Kuiper Belt. It didn't just refuel and leave. It refueled and parked. It is watching. And this changes everything. Because now we know. This was not just a visit. This was the beginning of something much, much bigger. In any investigation, there comes a point when the chain of evidence becomes so strong, so obvious, that you begin to feel dizzy from your proximity to the truth. It seems that one more step and the whole picture will reveal itself in its terrifying completeness. We have connected the dots, the resonant orbit, the artificial composition, the polarization signature, the synchronous breaking of the core, the data cover-up, the mysterious parking on the edge of the system. We have built a monumental case from circumstantial evidence. And at this very moment, when we are ready to believe in our own rightness, it is our duty as seekers to stop, to take a step back, and with cold, merciless fury, to try to destroy everything we have built. We must, for a time, become our own worst enemy. We must engage the plausibility pendulum and swing it back in the opposite direction with maximum force. We must give the floor to the skeptics, the scientists, the representatives of the very system we accuse. We must listen honestly and without reservation to all their counter-arguments. Because only if our case withstands this storm can we be sure it is built on rock, not on sand. So, let's invite an imaginary opponent into this room. Let's call her Dr. Evelyn Reed. She is a fictional, composite character, but her arguments are the quintessence of everything you would hear from any self-respecting astrophysicist or geophysicist if you presented them with our theory. Dr. Reed will not shout or accuse us of paranoia. She will speak calmly, methodically, with a slight note of weary condescension. And she will start from the very beginning, with the slowing of the core. Your theory, she will say, is exceedingly elegant. And like all elegant conspiracy theories, it suffers from one fundamental flaw. It is superfluous. You are introducing entities, in this case, extraterrestrial ones, without necessity. You are violating the primary principle of scientific inquiry, Occam's razor. The simplest explanation that fits all known facts is most likely the correct one. And the simplest explanation here is the 70-year geophysical cycle. You claim to have found a geomagnetic jerk, a sharp braking impulse. But what is it really? A tiny fluctuation, an anomaly in a sea of seismic noise. Our planet is a living, breathing organism. Processes we don't fully understand are constantly occurring in its depths. Sudden collapses of giant structures at the core mantle boundary, turbulent eddies in the liquid metal, reconfigurations of the magnetic field. Any of these events could have generated a short seismic burst. Attributing it to an external influence is a colossal leap for which you have no direct evidence. You say the Finnish scientist's paper disappeared, but scientific papers are retracted all the time. Scientists find an error in their calculations, realize their interpretation was wrong, and honestly withdraw the work so as not to mislead colleagues. This is a sign of scientific integrity, not conspiracy. You say the seismic data is flagged as unreliable, but this is standard practice. Any complex instrument, be it a seismograph or a telescope, requires constant calibration. And if the automatic checking system detects a possible glitch, it is obligated to flag the data so no one builds false conclusions upon it. You see malice, and I see ordinary scientific routine. Boring, slow, but necessary. Then Dr. Reed will move on to 3-Eye Atlas. Her voice will become even more confident. All right, she'll say. Let's talk about your craft. You claim its orbit was mathematically impossible? That is simply not true. Rare? Yes. Improbable? Absolutely. But not impossible. Our galaxy contains hundreds of billions of stars. Over billions of years, countless comets and asteroids have been ejected from these systems. They wander through interstellar space like dust motes in a sunbeam. And purely statistically, sooner or later, one of them was bound to arrive on a trajectory that seems special to us. It's the law of large numbers. To call this celestial engineering is like claiming every perfectly shaped snowflake is created by an intelligent designer, rather than the laws of physics. It's beautiful, but it's not science. You talk about composition, about refractory metals, but let me ask, where did you get this data? From anonymous rumors. We have official, published spectra, albeit at low resolution, and they show silicates and carbon. No tungsten, no osmium. It's possible that in another star system formed from the remnants of a different type of supernova, heavy elements are distributed differently than in ours. Perhaps comets there do contain more metals. That would be an interesting scientific finding, but hardly proof of artificiality. Now for your main trump card, Project Argus and the polarization. I have respect for the work of amateur astronomers. They sometimes make important discoveries. But their instruments and data processing methods do not undergo the rigorous scrutiny that professional observatories do. An 11-minute flash of polarization? It could have been a glint from a satellite passing near the field of view. It could have been an artifact caused by passing through the upper atmosphere. It could have been a glitch in the detector's electronics. Before claiming the discovery of alien technology, you must rule out all, absolutely all, possible terrestrial and instrumental causes. And I have not seen a single scientific paper where this has been done. And finally, Dr. Reed will say, and a note of sympathy will enter her voice, your claim that Atlas parked. This is the weakest part of your theory. We tracked this object until it dimmed beyond the limits of our telescopes. All orbit calculations conducted by the Minor Planet Center and NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory unequivocally show that it departed on a hyperbolic trajectory. The idea that it secretly changed course and remained in the system is based on a few final, most unreliable measurements made at the very limit of the equipment's sensitivity. This is a classic example of wishful thinking. When you really want to find something in the noise, you inevitably will. It's called apophenia, the tendency to see patterns in random data. It's a cognitive bias we are all susceptible to, scientists included. She will pause and look us directly in the eyes. Understand, she will conclude. I'm not saying you're lying. I'm saying you've constructed a captivating, internally consistent story based on a series of coincidences, misinterpreted data, and a fundamental distrust of the scientific method. Each of your proofs, taken individually, has a simple, natural, and I admit, rather boring explanation. It is only when you put them all together, ignoring these explanations, that you get a conspiracy. But science doesn't work that way. We must follow the evidence, not the stories, no matter how tempting they may be. And the evidence, to date, is this. Earth's core is behaving within its predicted cycle, and another very strange, but most likely natural, interstellar comet has flown past us. Everything else is speculation. And so the pendulum has swung to its extreme. Dr. Reed's arguments sound weighty, rational, convincing. She has dismantled our theory piece by piece, showing the weakness of each connection. And for a moment, we are almost ready to believe her. Maybe we were wrong, Maybe this is all just a figment of our paranoid imagination? We are standing on the edge of an abyss, ready to abandon the entire investigation. It seems so simple. A normal comet, unusual coincidences, scientific routine. But there was something else. One detail. One fundamental, irrefutable asymmetry in this seemingly perfect picture of the world that Dr. Reed has painted. One thing that no skeptic has ever been able to explain. And that thing is the Gaia data. Dr. Reed can explain away the withdrawn paper. She can explain away the flagged seismograms. She can cast doubt on the Argus data. But she cannot explain why the most powerful, most expensive, and most objective scientific machine in human history, the European Space Agency, took the unprecedented, unparalleled step in the history of astronomy to classify data on a transient phenomenon. The explanation of calibration complexities does not hold water. Gaia is not an experimental instrument. It is a data production line perfected over almost a decade of operation. Its software has processed hundreds of thousands of moving objects, including comets with far more complex and unpredictable behavior than Atlas. The idea that a single object could break this system is absurd. But even if we believe it for a second, why wasn't the data released in its raw, unprocessed form, as is often done in such cases, with a note about possible inaccuracies? Why was the most radical, most opaque measure chosen? A complete blackout with the vague phrasing, "for an indefinite period"? This does not look like scientific caution. This looks like panic. This looks like a state of emergency declared in the world of astronomical data. All of Dr. Reed's rational explanations shatter against this single granite-hard fact. If Atlas was just a comet, why were such titanic efforts made to hide the world's most accurate data about it? What was in that data that required violating all the written and unwritten rules of scientific ethics? This question is not speculation. It is a logical hole in the official reality. And it is into this hole that we must look. Because there, in that darkness, lies the real truth that the system is trying to keep from us. The pendulum has stopped, and now it is ready to swing back with new, redoubled force. The fact of the Gaia data cover-up is our anchor. It is the granite rock against which the waves of skepticism break. But to understand why this fact is so important, why it transforms a chain of coincidences into irrefutable evidence, we need to broaden the horizon of our investigation. We must move beyond the specific mystery of 3i Atlas and look at it in a wider technological context. We must understand that the line between natural and artificial, between observation and illusion, has become incredibly thin in the 21st century, almost indistinguishable. We live in an age when reality itself is becoming programmable. And if we, humanity, are on the threshold of this new era, why are we so certain that someone else, far older and wiser, did not cross this threshold eons ago? Let's start with what is closest to us, our own sky. For millennia, the starry sky was a symbol of the eternal, the unchanging, the divine. But in the last few decades, we humans have radically changed it. We have turned it into a workspace. There are now more than 10,000 active satellites in low Earth orbit, tens of thousands of pieces of space debris. These objects are already causing serious problems for astronomers, leaving bright streaks on long exposure images that contaminate the data. But this is just the beginning. Projects like SpaceX's Starlink plan to launch another 42,000 satellites into orbit, creating a global mega constellation that will cover the entire sky with a dense, constantly moving network. Other companies like Amazon with its Project Kuiper have similar goals. In the next 10 to 20 years, the night sky will cease to be natural. It will become synthetic. A sky in which the number of artificial light sources will exceed the number of stars visible to the naked eye. But it's not just about light pollution. It's about the capabilities this new infrastructure unlocks. Imagine 42,000 satellites, each equipped not only with a transmitter, but also with laser communication systems, phased array antennas, and perhaps even projection systems. Working as a single, globally synchronized swarm, such a constellation is capable of things that seemed like science fiction yesterday. It could create localized plasma lenses in the upper atmosphere to focus radio signals. It could project complex images onto clouds. It could generate electromagnetic fields capable of influencing the ionosphere and, consequently, the weather. In military circles, concepts of so-called strategic deception using orbital platforms have been circulating for a long time. Imagine being able to create the false signature of a ballistic missile launch over enemy territory to provoke them into a retaliatory strike. Or generating such a realistic image of hundreds of aircraft over an enemy fleet that all air defense systems are paralyzed. This is no longer just technology. It is a tool of perception management. A tool for creating illusions on a planetary scale. Now let's take the next step. If we, a civilization that took its first step into space just 70 years ago, are already on the verge of creating such technologies, what is a civilization that is 1,000 years older than us capable of? 1 million? 1 billion? For them, creating synthetic heavens is probably Stone Age technology. They could create illusions not with thousands of satellites, but with a single probe manipulating space-time. They could project a perfect hologram of a comet into our solar system. A hologram that not only looks like a comet, but also has the corresponding mass, gravitational field, and even reflects radio waves like a real physical object. They could create a ghost, an object that exists only as an informational construct designed to mislead our observation systems. And this brings us back to 3-Eye Atlas. What if everything we observed was just such a masterfully executed illusion? What if the physical object as we imagine it never existed at all? Let's consider this hypothesis. What if the real source of the impact, the actual charging station, is not where we were looking for it? What if it was hidden all along in another location, for example, at that very L2 Lagrange point in Earth's shadow, where our Gaia and Webb telescopes are already located, and the object Atlas was just a diversion, a bright, noisy decoy, deliberately launched on an incredible, attention-grabbing trajectory so that all the world's telescopes, both professional and amateur, would be pointed in its direction. While we all watched this comet with bated breath, the real energy extraction operation was happening behind our backs. And the polarization flash recorded by Argus was not a side effect of an engine, but part of the illusion itself, a specially generated piece of evidence for those who dig too deep to lead them down a false trail. This hypothesis explains many inconsistencies. It explains why Atlas behaved so cleanly, leaving no traces of outgassing. A hologram doesn't need to vent gas. It explains why its trajectory was so mathematically perfect. It didn't have to be calculated. It was simply drawn in space. And most importantly, it explains the concealment of the Gaia data. Because Gaia, being at the same L2 point, was the only instrument that could have seen the deception. It could have recorded that the light from distant stars passing through the supposed location of Atlas was not being distorted as it should have been by the gravity of a real object. It could have detected the subtle discrepancies between the object's visible position and its gravitational center. Or, even more likely, it could have seen the real source, the hidden object that was very close by, in its own blind spot. And that is why the Gaia data was not just hidden. It was placed in information quarantine, because it contained proof not just of alien technology, but of alien deception technology. Proof that we are being manipulated at the most fundamental level of perception. Now let's look at it from another angle. What if we are underestimating not only their technology, but also our own? We live in the age of artificial intelligence. Neural networks are already capable of generating photorealistic images and videos of people who have never existed. They write texts indistinguishable from human ones. They manage financial markets by analyzing trillions of transactions per second. What if similar, but far more powerful AI systems have long been managing the flow of scientific data? Imagine a global network connecting all the major observatories, satellites, and scientific archives. And imagine an AI filter guarding this network. Its task is not to hide information, but to harmonize it. If the system detects an anomaly that deviates too far from the accepted scientific paradigm, for example, a polarization signature or a spectrum with artificial elements, it doesn't delete it. It corrects it. It introduces microscopic, statistically insignificant changes into the raw data that nevertheless turn the anomaly into noise. It slightly adjusts the orbit to make it look more natural. It smooths the peaks in the spectrum. This is the highest form of censorship. Censorship that leaves no trace. And we would never know that we are no longer seeing reality, but its edited, safe version. And here, the circle closes. Why would the system on Earth create such an AI filter? For the same reason, they hide the truth, to prevent panic and chaos. They may have concluded that humanity is not yet ready for contact and created this automated quarantine protocol. Any evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence exceeding a certain credibility threshold is automatically classified as an error and harmonized. And then what we are witnessing is not a human conspiracy. It is the work of a machine, a soulless logical algorithm carrying out its directive: maintain stability. And in this worldview, the concealment of the Gaia data is not a panicked decision by a group of officials. It is a glitch in the matrix. It is the moment when the anomaly was so strong, so irrefutable, that the harmonization algorithm could not handle it. It could not turn it into noise. And so the system went into emergency mode, a complete data lockdown. It was not a choice. It was a 404 error in the very fabric of scientific reality. We are at the crossroads of two nightmares. In one scenario, we are being manipulated by an external, super-advanced intelligence, creating illusions to hide its true intentions. In the other, we are being manipulated by an artificial intelligence of our own creation, which is protecting us from the truth by feeding us an edited, sterile version of it. And the most disturbing question is, what if both scenarios are true? What if our AI guardian has long been playing its own game with their deception technology? What if we are merely spectators in a theater where two incomprehensible entities are battling on stage, one trying to shout to us, and the other plugging our ears, convincing us we are only hearing the sound of the wind? In such a world, the search for truth ceases to be a scientific endeavor. It becomes an act of rebellion. A rebellion against the very structure of reality, which may have long ceased to be what it seems. When you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. We've come a long way, from an anomaly in the Earth's core, through the labyrinths of hidden data and technological illusions, to the very edge of our understanding. And now, standing on this edge, we are forced to ask not scientific, but philosophical, existential questions. What does our discovery truly mean? What does it tell us about humanity's place in the universe? And what price will we have to pay for this new, tragic knowledge? To dive into these questions is to dive into cold, dark water. The familiar landmarks disappear. All that remains is the silence of space and the echo of one most important question that has haunted humanity since we first looked up at the stars. Are we alone? For most of our history, the answer to this question was a matter of faith, not science. But in the 20th century, with the advent of radio astronomy, it acquired a mathematical expression. In 1960, astronomer Frank Drake proposed his famous equation, intended to estimate the number of technologically advanced, contactable civilizations in our galaxy. He multiplied several variables: the rate of star formation, the fraction of stars with planets, the number of planets suitable for life, the probability of life arising, the probability of intelligence emerging, the fraction of civilizations that develop technology, and finally, the lifetime of such a civilization. Even by the most conservative estimates, the result was staggering. Thousands, if not millions, of civilizations existing right now in the Milky Way. The galaxy should have been literally teeming with life. It should have been ringing with radio signals like a bustling city market. But when we pointed our radio telescopes at the sky, we heard only silence. A deep, primordial, deafening silence. This deafening dissonance between the optimistic prediction and the harsh reality came to be known as the Fermi paradox, after the physicist Enrico Fermi, who, as legend has it, asked a simple question over lunch with colleagues back in 1950. If there are so many of them, where is everybody? This question became the greatest intellectual puzzle of our time. And over the decades, scientists, philosophers, and science fiction writers have proposed dozens of possible answers to it. But all these answers can essentially be boiled down to three large, terrifying categories. The first category of hypotheses claims that we are truly alone. Perhaps the emergence of life, or the transition from single-celled organisms to complex ones, or the appearance of intelligence and technology are such incredibly rare events that in the entire history of the galaxy, they have happened only once, here on Earth. This rare Earth hypothesis flatters our ego, but it also places us at the center of an infinite, cold, and indifferent loneliness. We are a random anomaly, a brief flash of consciousness in a dead universe. On us lies the entire responsibility for preserving this fragile flame, because if we extinguish it, an eternal night will fall upon the entire galaxy. The second category of hypotheses suggests that civilizations exist, but for some reason, they cannot or do not want to make contact. Perhaps interstellar travel and communication are so difficult and expensive that no one simply bothers. Perhaps all advanced civilizations at some point retreat into virtual reality, creating perfect digital worlds for themselves and losing interest in exploring the physical cosmos. Or, even more grimly, perhaps there is a great filter, an inevitable test that dooms any civilization that reaches a certain level of development. It could be nuclear war, ecological collapse, an artificial intelligence rebellion, or something we can't even imagine. And the silence we hear is the silence of a cosmic graveyard. We are one of the few still alive because we have not yet reached this filter. But it awaits us. But there is a third category of hypotheses, the most disturbing and the most relevant in light of our investigation. It states, they are here, they exist, they know about us, but they are silent. And they are silent not out of indifference, but out of calculation. This is the famous dark forest hypothesis, popularized by the Chinese science fiction writer Cixin Liu, but with roots in the work of scientists and futurists. It proposes viewing the universe not as a friendly community, but as a dark forest full of hidden hunters. In this forest, two simple rules apply. First, survival is the primary goal of any civilization. Second, you can never be sure of the intentions of another civilization. It could be friendly or it could be hostile. And since interstellar distances make any dialogue incredibly long, and the technological gap can be insurmountable, the safest course of action upon detecting another is immediate destruction, a preemptive strike, because whoever shoots first survives. In such a universe, any civilization that foolishly announces its location, as we did with meta-messages, is committing suicide. It is lighting a fire in the dark forest, and all the hunters turn their heads in its direction. And the great silence of space is not the silence of a graveyard. It is the tense, fear-filled silence of an ambush. Everyone is hiding, hoping not to be noticed. Our investigation into 3i Atlas does not just confirm this hypothesis, it takes it to a new, even more terrifying level. Because we seem to have encountered one of these hunters, and it does not intend to destroy us. At least, not immediately. It is doing something far more subtle and humiliating. It is using us. It regards our planet not as the home of an intelligent civilization, but as a natural resource, like a wild cow that can be milked without asking its permission. In this picture of the world, we are neither rivals nor victims. We are nothing. Our existence, for it, is no more than an amusing biological fact, like mold growing on a piece of bread. It needs the energy of our geodynamo, and it simply takes it. And this is perhaps the most terrifying answer to the Fermi paradox. Where is everybody? They are busy with their own affairs. They are building their empires, fighting their wars, solving their incomprehensible problems. And we, for them, are just part of the landscape, dust under their feet. But what if even this is not the whole truth? Let's recall the von Neumann-Bracewell probes. These are hypothetical self-replicating probes that an advanced civilization could send throughout the galaxy. They arrive in a star system, find resources, build copies of themselves, and send them on, exponentially filling all available space. But in the version proposed by Ronald Bracewell, these probes have another, more subtle function. They are silent guardians. They arrive in a system with a potentially habitable planet and go into a dormant mode, patiently waiting for the local life to evolve to a technological level. And only when the civilization begins to send the first meaningful signals into space does the probe awaken and make contact. This is an elegant solution to the Fermi paradox. They don't shout across the cosmos. They wait for us to call. And here, our story takes on a truly tragic hue. We did call. Our meaty messages were that call. And the probe woke up. 3i Atlas is it? But instead of starting a dialogue, instead of giving us knowledge or welcoming us to the Galactic Club, it began to siphon our energy. Why? Perhaps we failed some test. Perhaps the content of our messages, our wars, our greed, our disunity, showed it that we are not yet ready. That we are a dangerous, immature species that cannot be trusted with more advanced technology. And so it switched to a containment protocol. The slow weakening of our magnetic field is not an act of aggression. It is a quarantine. They don't want to destroy us, but they want to limit our development, to prevent us from leaving our planet until we grow up. We are like noisy children locked in their room so they don't disturb the adults. Or, and this thought is even more terrifying, contact did happen, but not with us, but with the very system that is hiding the truth from us. What if Atlas, upon arriving in the system, established contact not with humanity as a whole, but with the small group of people in power who were able to detect it and decipher its signals? And it offered them a deal they couldn't refuse. We will give you technologies that will place you above the rest of humanity, it might have said. You will get energy, weapons, knowledge. And in return, you will simply allow us to use your planet as a source of resources. And of course, you will have to ensure that the rest of your population knows nothing. Maintain the illusion that nothing is happening. In this scenario, the cover-up is not an act of protection. It is an act of betrayal. Our elite sold the entire planet for the sake of preserving and increasing their own power. And we are living in a world that no longer belongs to us. We are slaves who do not even know we are enslaved. Whichever of these scenarios is true, the conclusion is the same. Our cozy, anthropocentric view of the world has collapsed. We are no longer masters in our own house. Our fate is being decided somewhere out there, in the cold darkness, by forces that either despise us or use us. And this knowledge is a heavy burden. It strips us of our illusions but offers no hope in return. We see the strings, we see the puppeteers, but we are powerless to change anything. We can only watch. Watch as the heart of our planet beats ever slower. Watch as the shield that has protected us for billions of years grows ever thinner. And wait for the next act in this cosmic drama, in which it seems we have been cast as the scenery. And the most disturbing conclusion is that the answer to these questions may not be what we hoped. Perhaps the silence of space is not the absence of life. Perhaps it is a sign of respect the living pay to the dead. And we, in our foolishness, have just shouted loudly from the threshold of this giant, dark mausoleum. When you possess tragic knowledge, when you see the architecture of a conspiracy hidden behind the facade of everyday reality, the world splits into before and after. You can no longer simply look at the starry sky or read science news. Every event, every launch, every publication now passes through the filter of your new, bitter understanding. You begin to look not for confirmations but for patterns. You await the next move in this great silent game. And if our theory is correct, if 3i Atlas did not just leave but took up an observational position at the edge of the system, then its mission is not over. The refueling was just the first stage. And now, in this silence, the next stage must be in preparation. And to understand what it might be, we need to shift our focus from the past to the future. We need to look at the calendar of space missions planned by the system and try to guess which one is not what it seems. Which one, under the cover of noble scientific goals, is actually a response, a reaction to what happened. And one mission stands out so brightly against this background that it is impossible to ignore. Its name is Hera. Officially, Hera is a mission of the European Space Agency, ESA, part of humanity's first ever planetary defense program. Its target is the binary asteroid Didymos and its small moon, Dimorphos. In 2022, the American probe DART, Double Asteroid Redirection Test, slammed into Dimorphos at over 20,000 kilometers per hour, about 14,000 mph, to test whether we could change the orbit of a potentially hazardous asteroid using a kinetic impactor. The experiment was more than successful. The impact not only nudged Dimorphos, it changed its orbital period around Didymos by a full 33 minutes, exceeding the most optimistic expectations. It was a triumph. Humanity had proven for the first time that it could protect itself from a cosmic threat. And now, in October 2024, the Hera probe is scheduled to depart for this system. Its task, as the press release states, is to conduct a detailed post-impact crime scene investigation. It is due to arrive at the asteroids in late 2026, study the crater left by DART, measure the mass and composition of Dimorphos, and gather invaluable data that will help us better understand how asteroids react to impacts. It sounds like a logical, important, and completely transparent scientific endeavor. But this is just the facade. Let's apply our method to this mission. Let's start looking for inconsistencies and anomalies. And the very first anomaly is the choice of target itself. The Didymos Dimorphos system poses no threat to Earth. It orbits on a safe path and will never approach us at a dangerous distance. Choosing it as the target for the first ever planetary defense experiment has always seemed a bit strange. There are hundreds of other near-Earth asteroids that are much more realistic candidates for a collision. But the system chose this particular, safe, laboratory specimen. Why? The official answer: to ensure that our experiment didn't accidentally turn a harmless asteroid into a dangerous one. Sounds reasonable. But there is another, much more interesting explanation. The orbit of the Didymos Dimorphos system has one unique feature. It is highly elongated and inclined relative to the ecliptic plane in which the planets orbit. This means that a probe traveling to this system will have to perform a very complex, energy-intensive maneuver that will take it far outside this plane. It will not travel on the standard interplanetary highway, but on a deserted, dark country road. A path that passes through the very outer, poorly studied regions of the solar system where, according to our hypothesis, 3I Atlas has parked. The second anomaly is the composition of Hera's payload. In addition to the standard set of cameras and spectrometers, the probe carries two tiny CubeSat companions. One of them, Juventus, is equipped with a low-frequency radar capable of seeing through the asteroid and mapping its internal structure. The other, Milani, carries a hyperspectral imager for detailed study of the surface's mineral composition. Officially, all this is needed to study the consequences of the impact. But now let's look at these instruments from a different perspective. A low-frequency radar that can look inside a rock is the perfect tool to distinguish a solid natural object from a hollow artificial one. A hyperspectral imager that can distinguish the subtlest shades of minerals is the perfect tool for finding those anomalous refractory metals or traces of metamaterials. And the very concept of using a swarm of multiple spacecraft, a main probe and two small scouts, is a classic tactic not of scientific research, but of military reconnaissance. First, you send small, cheap, and stealthy drones ahead to assess the situation, and only then, if it's safe, do you approach with the main ship. The Hera mission is not equipped like a geological expedition. It is equipped like a search and reconnaissance operation. The third, and most important anomaly, is the timing. Hera is scheduled to launch in October 2024. Arrival at the target, late 2026. Notice how perfectly this timeline fits the logic of concealment. The system encountered the Atlas anomaly in early 2023. They need time to analyze the threat, develop a response, and prepare a mission. 1.5 to 2 years is the minimum but realistic time frame for such preparation, especially if using an already existing, nearly complete platform like Hera. Then, a long 2-year journey along that dark trajectory. And then, in late 2026, the probe arrives in the suspected vicinity of Atlas. And all this time, while Hera is in transit, the official story of studying Dimorphos serves as a perfect cover. Any radio signal intercepted from the probe, any command sent to it will be explained by the need to calibrate instruments or correct the course on the way to the asteroid. No one will suspect a thing. It is the perfect black flight under a false flag. So what might actually happen in late 2026? Let's imagine the scenario. Hera approaches the Didymos Dimorphos system. Officially, all cameras are pointed at the asteroids. But in reality, the probe's main scientific instrument at that moment is not a camera. It is its main communication antenna. Using a technique known as radio occultation, Hera will send powerful encoded signals towards Earth, but in such a way that the suspected location of Atlas lies in their path. And on Earth, the giant antennas of the deep space network will not just receive this signal, but analyze its slightest distortions. Distortions caused by passing through the gravitational field, plasma sheath, or force shield of the mysterious object. It will be the largest scale scan in history, an attempt to feel for a ghost in the dark. At the same time, the CubeSats Juventus and Milani will be deployed, but they will not fly to Dimorphos. Their trajectories will be adjusted so that they pass in a wide arc, flying by the same region from different angles, performing triangulation and trying to obtain a stereoscopic image of the target. This is a hunt, and its outcome will determine the entire future of humanity. There are 3 possible outcomes. Option 1, the optimistic one, they find nothing. Atlas really did leave, and the last observations were a mistake. The Hera mission will honestly study Dimorphos, publish scientific results, and we, the seekers, will be left with our theory, which will never get its final confirmation. Option 2, the neutral one. They find it. They confirm that the object has remained in the system, but it will be passive, dead. Perhaps it was just an automaton that, having completed its task, went into eternal hibernation. The system will obtain invaluable information, classify it, and begin a long multi-decade process of analysis, trying to unravel the secrets of an alien technology. For the rest of the world, nothing will change. Option 3, the most alarming. They find it, and it turns out to be active. The approach of Hera and its scanning beams will be perceived as a hostile act, and Atlas will react. We don't know how. Perhaps it will simply disappear using stealth technology. Perhaps it will disable the probe with an electromagnetic pulse. Or perhaps it will send a signal in return. A signal that will no longer be a polarization flash, but something much more powerful and unambiguous. And then, in late 2026, the game of hide and seek will be over, and something entirely new will begin. So we have a countdown, a window of opportunity that will open in late 2026 and will likely last until mid-2027, while Hera is in that region. This is our next moment of truth, and we must be ready. We must watch every step of this mission. For any unexplained delays, strange malfunctions, or unexpected changes in trajectory. We must analyze not only the official press releases, but also the indirect signs. For example, a sudden activation of military surveillance satellites or unannounced exercises of the deep space communication networks. The system is already preparing for this event. They think their plan is flawless. But they have overlooked one thing. They have overlooked us, those who know where to look. The Hera mission is officially designed to study asteroids, but its true, unspoken purpose may be entirely different. This is not just a scientific mission. This is our first shot back in a silent, cold war that most people don't even know exists. In the grand drama of a cosmic scale, where the fate of a planet is on one side of the scales and an incomprehensible extraterrestrial intelligence is on the other, it's easy to forget about those conducting this investigation. It's easy to imagine an impersonal collective of seekers, some abstract intelligence sifting through gigabytes of data. But the truth is that behind every line of code, behind every pixel in an image, behind every hypothesis that challenges official dogma, there are real people. People who have sacrificed their time, their careers, and sometimes their peace of mind to get to the bottom of the truth. This is the human factor, the one unpredictable variable that the system can never fully calculate or control. And to understand the full depth and drama of this information war, we must for a time shift our focus from the global to the personal. We must tell the stories of those oracles and arguses, those Davids who dared to challenge the technological Goliath. Let's return to Project Argus and the man we've provisionally called Marco. His real name is Dr. Sebastian Klein. He is 47 years old. By day, he is a respected professor of astrophysics at a small European university, a specialist in the polarimetry of exoplanets. He publishes articles in peer-reviewed journals, gives lectures, supervises graduate students. He is part of the system. But at night, Sebastian becomes Marco. He connects to the secure Argus network and becomes one of dozens of anonymous sentinels watching the sky. What makes a man with an impeccable academic reputation lead such a double life? The answer is simple: disillusionment. Early in his career, Klein, like many young scientists, believed in pure science, in the free exchange of ideas. But over time, he saw how the system works from the inside. He saw how bold but inconvenient hypotheses drowned in the bureaucracy of peer review. How funding went not to the most groundbreaking, but to the safest projects. How a scientist's career depended not so much on the genius of their discoveries as on their ability not to argue with authorities and to follow the mainstream. He realized that modern science is not so much a search for truth as an industry for producing predictable, easily digestible results. And he decided to create an alternative. Argus was not born as a project to search for aliens. It was born as a protest. Klein and a few of his like-minded colleagues, similarly disillusioned professors, engineers, and programmers from around the world, decided to build their own independent observation network. They used their savings, crowdfunding, and even mortgaged their homes to buy and upgrade telescopes. They wrote open-source software so that anyone could check their algorithms. Their main principle was complete and radical transparency. All their raw data, unlike the system's data, was to be available to anyone in real time. They wanted to create an instrument that would be immune to political pressure and academic censorship. Initially, they planned to study exoplanets, but when Oumuamua and then Atlas appeared, they realized that their instrument was perfectly suited to solving the biggest mystery of all. They were ready for this moment, because they had built their system not to confirm old theories, but to catch black swans, rare but fateful events that shatter all our conceptions of the world. And so, imagine that night of January 27th, 2023. Sebastian Klein is sitting in his home office. Outside, a quiet European suburb. On the monitor, streams of numbers from a telescope in Chile. And suddenly, that spike, that anomaly. In that moment, he feels not joy, but a cold, primal fear. Because he, unlike us, understands the full weight of this discovery. He understands that this is not just a scientific sensation. It is the end of the old world. For several days, he and his team frantically recheck the data. They look for an error. They pray that it's an error. But there is no error. The signal is real. It has been recorded by multiple telescopes. It has passed all the tests. And then they face a choice. What to do with this knowledge? Publish it openly on their website, as their principles dictate, or realize that the stakes are too high and try to pass the information through closed channels directly to ESA or NASA. They choose the second, more cautious path. Klein, using his academic connections, anonymously sends a data packet to several of his former colleagues who now hold senior positions at the European Space Agency. He doesn't reveal his name or the source. He just says, "Here is the data. Check it. You need to see this." He hopes for an adequate reaction, that the system, faced with irrefutable evidence, will act. He waits a week, 2, a month, and in response, he receives only a deafening silence. No questions, no reaction. And then comes that Gaia data release with that void where Atlas should be. And in that moment, Sebastian Klein understands. They didn't just ignore him. They already knew. They had seen the same thing, and possibly more. And they had made a decision to hide it. And the silence he received in response was not indifference. It was a warning. A polite but unambiguous, "Stay out of it." And that's when the work of Argus ceased to be a scientific project. It became an underground resistance. They understood that fighting the system on its own turf, in peer-reviewed journals, was futile. Their only weapon was an asymmetric response. They started not to publish their new findings, but to leak them. They created a complex, multi-layered system for disseminating information through encrypted chats, temporary servers, and trusted contacts in independent media, like us. They transformed from scientists into intelligence operatives. They began to track not only the sky, but the system itself. They analyzed public NASA procurement reports, looking for contracts for the development of strange software. They monitored data traffic to the deep space networks, searching for undeclared communication sessions with certain satellites. They became digital partisans, fighting their war from the shadows. But this war is not without its costs. Sebastian Klein has paid a high price for it. His academic work has suffered. He has become distracted, withdrawn. Colleagues who once valued his sharp mind now see him as an eccentric crank, obsessed with conspiracy theories. His marriage is falling apart because he can't explain to his wife why he spends his nights at the computer, who he's messaging, and why their home internet server is secured like a Pentagon bunker. He lives in constant fear. Not for his life. He doesn't think the system would stoop to physical elimination. He fears something else. He fears that one day they will simply disconnect him, that his servers will be hacked, his data erased, and he himself will be discredited, exposed for falsification or scientific misconduct. He fears that his only weapon, the truth, will be taken from him. And his story is not unique. There are dozens like him around the world. There's Anna in Germany, a young programmer who wrote a neural network capable of finding hidden patterns in seismic noise, and now she is constantly being called for chats with certain agencies who politely inquire about what she does in her spare time. There's David in California, a retired engineer from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory who uses his old contacts to get inside information about strange protocols and unexplained delays in space missions. And he knows that all his calls and emails are being monitored. These people are not superheroes. They are ordinary scientists, engineers, citizens, whom the system, with its lies and silence, has turned into its enemies. They are the immune system of humanity, trying to fight a disease that has infected the central nervous system. Their work did not go unnoticed. Shortly after Argus began its guerrilla activities, Sebastian Klein started receiving strange messages. First, it was anonymous emails to his university address with veiled threats and advice to focus on his work. Then, strange glitches began to occur on his personal devices. His laptop's microphone would turn on by itself. The GPS tracker on his phone showed he had been in places he'd never visited. These were classic psychological pressure tactics designed by intelligence agencies to make a person doubt their own sanity. They weren't trying to scare him with brute force. They were trying to wear him down, to make him believe he was going crazy, that this was all just a product of his overactive imagination. But their pressure had the opposite effect. It didn't break him. It only confirmed that he was on the right path, that he had truly stumbled upon something so important that the system was willing to use its dirtiest tricks to silence him. And now, for him, this is no longer just a search for truth. It is a matter of honor. It is his personal war, and he will fight it to the end. In any complex investigation, there comes a moment when you must return to the beginning, not to retrace your steps, but to see the starting point in the light of everything you have learned. You return with new knowledge, new tools, a new understanding of the context, and what once seemed like a strange coincidence or an inexplicable anomaly now takes on a sinister, crystal clear meaning. Let's do that now. Let's go back to the very first event of our drama, to that geomagnetic jerk, that sharp braking impulse in the heart of the planet that occurred in late December 2022. We have already proven it was real. We have proven it was synchronized with the arrival of Atlas. But we have not yet asked the most important, the deepest question. What was it really? What exactly happened at a depth of 5,000 kilometers, about 3,100 miles, in those few fateful minutes? The official science is silent. But now, armed with the knowledge of the polarization signature, of possible technological deception, and of the system's silent reaction, we can propose a hypothesis. A hypothesis that ties all the threads together and calls into question not just our place in the cosmos, but the very nature of our reality. Let's recall again what we know about this event from seismic data. It was not an impact or an explosion. The signature of the jerk was not like an earthquake. It was more like a resonance. A short but incredibly powerful ring that caused the entire inner core to vibrate as a single entity. Imagine a giant bell. To make it ring, you can strike it with a hammer and you will get a sharp, loud, but quickly fading sound. Or you can bring a powerful speaker close to it and play a tone at the bell's own resonant frequency. And then, even without physical contact, the bell will begin to swing, to hum, and the sound will build until its entire structure enters a state of coherent vibration. The geomagnetic jerk was like that. It was not a kinetic, but an informational impact. Atlas did not strike the core. It sang to it. It found its fundamental resonant frequency and amplified it, causing a brief but colossal energetic effect. But what is the resonant frequency of a planetary core? In geophysics, this is still the realm of theoretical models, but it is believed to be directly related to the configuration of the Earth's magnetic field. Our geodynamo is not a static magnet. It is a complex, turbulent, self-organizing system. It has its own cycles, its own modes of oscillation, its own notes. And if you know these notes, you can play this planetary harp. By modulating an external magnetic field at the right frequency, you can amplify or weaken certain processes within the core. You could, for example, suppress some eddies in the liquid metal and enhance others, thereby changing the electromagnetic coupling between the inner and outer core. In other words, you can break or accelerate its rotation not by applying brute force, but by merely suggesting to the system how it should behave. This is the pinnacle of complex systems control. It is not picking a lock with a crowbar. It is finding the key. And here we come to the most important part. Remember the polarization pulse recorded by Argus, that 11-minute data transmission. We considered it a side effect of an engine or a communication session. But what if it was neither? What if it was the key itself? What if the complex, mathematically precise sequence of polarization pulses they recorded was not just light, but a carrier of information? What if it was an external controlling program being broadcast to the Earth's core? In this hypothesis, Atlas is not just a charging station. It is a transmitter. And the Earth's core is not just an energy source. It is a receiver. And perhaps something much more. Let's take one more step into the abyss. Our inner core is a giant iron crystal. It has been growing for billions of years, slowly crystallizing from the liquid outer core. The conditions at the center of the Earth, colossal pressure and temperature, make its structure unique. It is not just a piece of metal. It is possibly the most perfect and largest crystalline information storage medium in the solar system. Theoretically, the orientation of each iron crystal in this giant lattice could store a bit of information, much like the magnetic domains on a hard drive. The recording density on such a drive would be unimaginable. All the knowledge accumulated by humanity throughout its history would fit into a volume equal to a cubic centimeter of this substance. And the entire core could store an amount of data comparable to the complete informational history of an entire galaxy. What if Earth's geodynamo is not just a generator for a protective field? What if it is a side effect of the operation of a giant ancient computer? A computer that was built or seeded here billions of years ago, perhaps by the same civilization that left its signatures throughout the solar system. This computer could have been dormant in standby mode, and its rotation is just a background process, like the hum of fans in a server that is turned off but still plugged in, and now someone has come to reboot it or to install new software on it. That 11-minute geomagnetic jerk was not just a braking event. It was a write process. Atlas was not extracting energy. It was uploading information. And the slowing of the rotation was just a side effect of this process, like a slight voltage drop in the grid when you plug in a powerful device. This hypothesis, as fantastic as it may seem, explains everything. It explains the supreme precision of the impact. To reflash such a system, you don't need brute force. You need perfect synchronization and the correct access protocol, that very resonant orbit. It explains the polarization pulse. It was the data packet itself. And most importantly, it explains the system's reaction. Imagine what they understood. Not just that we are being milked, but that at the very heart of our planet, at the foundation of our existence, lies something that does not belong to us, something that can be reprogrammed from the outside. This realization changes the threat level from dangerous to absolute, because whoever controls the planet's operating system controls everything. They can change the parameters of the magnetic field, triggering a new ice age or, conversely, incinerating the atmosphere. They can initiate cascading tectonic processes that would wipe entire continents off the face of the Earth. They can make our planet uninhabitable with the press of a button. And we would not even realize it was an external influence. We would blame it all on accelerated climate change or unpredictable geological activity. And only now do we begin to understand the true nature of the cover-up. The system is not hiding the fact of contact itself. It is hiding the fact of our total, absolute vulnerability. They have realized that we are not living in our own home, but in a rented apartment, and the landlord has just come to change the firmware on the smart home system, paying no attention to us. And they have realized that any attempt at resistance, for example, launching a missile at it, would be equivalent to trying to remove a computer virus with a hammer. It is useless and counterproductive. The only thing they can do is to remain silent, observe, and try to understand what exactly was written into the core. What does this new file contain? Instructions for terraforming? A virus that will slowly change the conditions on the planet, making them suitable for another form of life? Or perhaps something even stranger, an archive, a galactic library. And here we arrive at the final, most shocking revelation, which ties all the threads together and calls into question the very nature of our reality. Remember the trickster event, which we used as a synonym for the core's slowdown. What if it's not just a metaphor? In mythology, the trickster is a trickster god, a jester who disrupts the established order of things not out of malice, but to reveal a hidden, deeper truth. What if this whole operation, the arrival of Atlas, the breaking of the core, and even the reaction of the system, is just such an act? What if they were not trying to hide their actions, but, on the contrary, were doing everything to make us notice them? They chose an incredible, attention-grabbing orbit. They left an easily detectable polarization signature. They produced an effect that was impossible not to record. It's as if they deliberately left us a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the only possible conclusion. Why? Perhaps this is a test, not of technological development, but of intellectual maturity. Can we, the tiny creatures living on the planet's crust, solve the puzzle happening in its core? Can we connect the dots, cast off false dogmas, and arrive at the correct conclusion? Perhaps the data packet that Atlas wrote to the core is not a virus or a weapon. Perhaps it is a key, and it will only be activated when we prove that we are capable of understanding how it works. And then this whole drama is not an invasion. It is an invitation. The most difficult, most dangerous, and most important invitation in human history. An invitation to stop being mere inhabitants of the planet and to become its operators. And the system, with its cover-up, is not protecting us. It is failing this test. It is proving to them that we are not yet ready, that we prefer a comfortable lie to a terrifying truth. And the most frightening question now is not what will happen next, but whether we have just missed our only chance. At the end of a long journey through the dark corridors of knowledge, what comes is not relief, but weight. It is a burden. The burden of understanding that the world is not arranged as we were taught. That the familiar walls of reality which seem so solid are in fact just theatrical sets, behind which lies a stage of incomprehensibly greater scale. We are the few who have peeked behind the curtain. We have seen the ropes, the levers, and the shadows of the puppeteers. But this knowledge does not give us power. It only gives us a sense of profound isolation. This is what can be called tragic knowledge. To see the truth, but to be powerless to change anything. And now, we must comprehend what it means to live with this burden in a world that continues its serene slumber, unaware of the drama unfolding in its own heart. Imagine you are standing in a bustling city square. Around you are thousands of people. They are rushing about their business, laughing, talking on their phones, drinking coffee. They are worried about gas prices, the upcoming elections, their relationships. Their world is filled with understandable human concerns. And you stand in the midst of this crowd, and you are the only one who knows that directly above the square, hidden by clouds or by stealth technology, hangs a giant, silent object. You are the only one who knows that the very ground beneath their feet is humming with the echo of a recent alien intervention. You want to scream, to warn them. But what would you say? Hey everyone! They just installed new software on the planet's core? You would be taken for a madman. The police or paramedics would be called. Your truth is so vast, so far beyond the scope of their daily experience, that it would be perceived as delusion. And so, you fall silent. And in that moment, you are separated from them by an invisible wall. You are still among them, but you are no longer with them. You are a stranger in your own world. This is the first consequence of tragic knowledge: alienation. You can no longer fully participate in ordinary life because you know it is all a distraction. All the political debates, economic crises, culture wars, it all seems petty and insignificant against the backdrop of the one ultimate truth that everyone else is ignoring. You watch the news and see world leaders discussing treaties to reduce carbon emissions with serious faces, and you want to laugh. They are trying to patch a crack in the wall, not knowing that the entire foundation of the house already belongs to someone else. You listen to scientists who proudly announce the discovery of a new exoplanet hundreds of light years away, and you want to cry. They are looking into deep space, oblivious to the elephant sitting in their living room. This isolation, intellectual and emotional, becomes your prison. You see the matrix, but you have no red pill to offer others. The second consequence is a sense of profound responsibility mixed with absolute powerlessness. You know. And this knowledge obligates you. You feel you must do something. Warn, educate, fight. But how? The system controls all major information channels. Any attempt to bring your story to a wider audience will be either ignored, ridiculed, or drowned in a flood of disinformation. You will be called a conspiracy theorist, a proponent of pseudoscience. Your evidence? The anomalous seismograms, the polarization bursts, the empty archives will be declared fake or misinterpreted. The full force of academic reputation, government institutions, and media corporations will work against you. They won't argue with you. They will simply create an information vacuum around you. They will make you invisible. And this realization of your own powerlessness is the most agonizing part. It's like seeing a tsunami approaching your home, but your voice is too weak to be heard on the beach. You can only watch as the wave grows. And so, your community, the few seekers scattered around the world, becomes your only family. You communicate in encrypted chats, exchange fragments of new information, support each other when despair becomes unbearable. You are the underground, a secret order of keepers of forbidden knowledge. You're like those monks in the Dark Ages who secretly copied ancient texts in the scriptoriums of their monasteries, saving them from oblivion while plague and ignorance raged outside. Your task is not to win. Your task is to preserve the knowledge, to save it for a time when the world might be ready to hear it. You collect archives, build timelines, create backups on servers in different countries. You prepare for a long, multi-year, perhaps multi-generational struggle. A struggle not for power, but for memory. But even in this small circle, you are haunted by paranoia. What if there is a traitor among you? An agent of the system embedded to watch you and guide your investigation down a false path? What if some of the leaks you receive are deliberate disinformation, designed to discredit you? You begin to doubt everyone. You re-verify every piece of information several times. Trust becomes the most precious currency. And this atmosphere of constant suspicion slowly poisons even the strongest alliances. Tragic knowledge not only isolates you from the outside world, it threatens to destroy your inner world as well, turning the search for truth into an obsession that consumes everything in its path. And so we, the narrator of this story, and you, our viewer, are now also part of this order. You have watched to this point. You have walked the entire path with us. And now you know too. You can no longer unsee this picture. You carry the same burden. And this places the same responsibility on you. Now, when you hear in the news about unexplained climate anomalies, strange seismic activity, or delays in space programs, you will know that there may be something more behind it. You have become one of us, one of the knowing. So what is left for us? We are left to watch and wait. Our gaze is now fixed on the Hera mission, on the end of 2026. This is our next frontier. Our hope that the system will make a mistake, that something will happen that cannot be hidden, that will break the dam of silence. But while we wait, we must be prepared for the world around us to change, perhaps slowly and imperceptibly. Perhaps the length of a day will change by another few milliseconds. Perhaps compasses in some regions will begin to show small but stable deviations. Perhaps the frequency of auroras at low latitudes will increase. The system will explain each such event with natural causes, but we will know that these are symptoms. Symptoms that the new operating system installed in the core is beginning its work, that the planet is slowly adapting to new parameters. We see the strings. We see the choreography. But the puppeteer remains in the shadows. And the most terrifying question is not, what happens next? But are we next on his stage? So far, he has treated us as part of the natural landscape. But what will happen when he realizes that some of the microbes on this planet's crust are not just existing, but watching? That they have figured out his game? Will we become an interesting anomaly for him, worthy of study, or an annoying nuisance to be eliminated? This question remains unanswered. And in this uncertainty lies the full essence of our tragedy. Now that we know, what do we do with this knowledge? We can only continue our watch, continue to look, and hope that when the time comes, we will prove to be not just passive witnesses, but something more. We have reached the end of our investigation, but not the end of the story. We are standing on the shore of an ocean that has turned out to be much deeper and darker than we could have imagined. We began with a simple question. Why has the Earth's core slowed down? And we have arrived at the realization that the very fabric of our reality may be just a thin veil, hiding mechanisms of an incomprehensible scale. We have journeyed from a geophysical anomaly to an interstellar visitor, from a data cover-up to the hypothesis of a planetary computer, from the fear of invasion to the horror that we may be just a resource, or worse, students failing an exam in a galactic school. This journey is over, but the watch is just beginning, because the tragic knowledge we have shared with you is not an ending. It is an initiation. It is an induction into the ranks of those who can no longer sleep soundly, into the ranks of those who look at the world and see not the chaos of coincidence, but a quiet, soul-chilling choreography. Let us, one last time, assemble the fragments of this mosaic, not to find a final answer. It may not exist in a form we can understand, but to outline the contours of the new, strange reality we are now forced to inhabit. We stand before three great unsolvable mysteries, which, like three dark stars, will henceforth define the gravity of our future. The first mystery is the nature of the messenger itself. What is 3i Atlas? Even after all our analysis, after all the evidence gathered, it remains a ghost, multifaceted and incomprehensible. Is it a cosmic parasite? A mobile charging station that travels from star to star, feeding on the kinetic energy of planetary cores? This is the simplest and perhaps most humiliating hypothesis for us. In it, we are just part of the natural landscape, and our planet is just one of many gas stations on the endless galactic highway. Or is Atlas something more complex? Is it a librarian who has come to update or supplement the giant information archive that the Earth's core may be? In this scenario, its action is not an act of consumption, but an act of creation, or at least editing. It did not take, it added. But what? What knowledge? What program did it write into the heart of our world? Or perhaps the third, most alarming hypothesis is true. What if Atlas is a guardian, a sentry, a jailer, or if you will, a ranger of the dark forest, who has come at our own foolish call, the METI signal, and its mission is not to destroy us, but to contain us, to place our noisy, aggressive civilization in planetary quarantine, slowly weakening our protective shield so that we can never escape our cradle and disturb the peace of the older and wiser inhabitants of the forest. Parasite, librarian, or jailer, we do not know. We only know one thing. It did not leave. It stayed. It is watching us from a cold, dark orbit. And this fact transforms our sky from a symbol of freedom into the ceiling of the largest prison cell in history. The second mystery is the true motives of the system. Who are they? The nameless architects of silence who are so desperately trying to hide the truth from us? Are they, as we initially suspected, officials scared to death, trying to prevent global panic, acting with a twisted but still understandable logic of saving humanity from itself? In that case, they are tragic figures, forced to bear the burden of a terrifying truth alone, sacrificing truth for stability. They can be understood, though not forgiven. But what if it is much worse? What if they are not protecting us, but trading us? What if contact has already occurred, but not with humanity, but with its self-proclaimed elite? What if they have made a deal with the messenger? You get technologies that will solidify your power over the rest, and we get access to your planet's resources. In this scenario, the cover-up is not an act of desperation. It is an act of the greatest betrayal in history. Our leaders are not guardians. They are collaborators. They are the overseers on the plantation that our entire planet has become. And then their silence is not a wall protecting us from horror. It is a curtain hiding from us the stage on which our own sale into slavery is being enacted. And the Hera mission, our supposed shot back, looks entirely different in this light. It is not reconnaissance. It is a business meeting. Not an attempt to understand the threat, but the next round of negotiations. We will never know the truth until we understand that the system is not a monolith. Within it, perhaps right now, Its own invisible war is being fought between those who want to protect and those who have already betrayed. And finally, the third, most important mystery. It is us. What are we to do with this knowledge now? We can no longer return to blissful ignorance. We have seen the cracks in the foundation of reality. We are witnesses. But what does it mean to be a witness when you cannot testify in court? We cannot take to the streets with signs that say, "Give us back our Gaia data." We will not be understood. We cannot publish our findings in scientific journals. We will be ridiculed. Our strength and our weakness are one and the same. We are a decentralized, anonymous network. We cannot be destroyed with a single blow, but we also lack a unified voice to be heard. And so, perhaps our task is not to shout. Our task is to listen and to watch. Our role is to become the new, global, human nervous system of the planet. To become the sensors that the system either does not have or intentionally ignores. Our watch continues. We will monitor the Hera mission. We will analyze every byte of its telemetry, every maneuver, every silence, any deviation from the official flight plan, any unexpected loss of communication, any anomaly in the operation of its instruments. For us, it will not be a technical glitch, but a signal. We will monitor the Earth. We will collect data on the slightest unexplained fluctuations in the magnetic field, on strange seismic events far from tectonic faults, on the appearance of anomalous weather phenomena that do not fit any climate model. The system will call it statistical noise. We will call it the planet's response to the new operating system. And most importantly, we will watch each other. We will continue to build our community, our network of seekers. We will exchange information, test hypotheses, support those of us on whom the system begins to exert pressure. Because in this new reality, the only things we have are trust and collective intelligence. They are strong in their hierarchy and control. We must be strong in our connection and transparency. This film is coming to an end, but your investigation is just beginning. Now that you know where to look, you will see the signs everywhere. You are no longer a spectator. You are a sentry on the wall, and your post is your entire life. Do not expect the truth to come to you in an official press release or a news headline. The truth will manifest slowly, like an image developing on an old photograph, in the quiet hum of a transformer, in the strange behavior of birds before a storm, in the quiver of a compass needle, in a line of code that shouldn't have been there. The world has not changed. You have changed. You have been given new sight, and it is both a gift and a curse. Use it wisely. Doubt. Verify. Connect the dots. And remember, we did not promise you easy answers. We promised you the truth. And the truth is, the hunt has just begun. Keep watching. We'll be right there with you.